The protagonist decides, out of nowhere, that he wants to adopt a child and goes to an orphanage. However, one of the children gets scared of his cold gaze and starts crying. Frustrated, he reflects on how long he will have to deal with situations like this. After seeing all the children, he stands up and declares that there is no one there for him, planning to search elsewhere. As he is leaving, he hears a child shouting for a man to let her go. The girl bites the man's finger and runs toward the protagonist, calling him sir. The man accompanying the protagonist notices that the girl did not cry when looking into his eyes, which is unusual. Additionally, he observes that the child's hair and eyes are the color of obsidian stones, just like the Duke's. Intrigued, the protagonist asks why she was not presented earlier since he had asked to see all the children. The orphanage director explains that the girl is problematic, clumsy, and causes many incidents, so she was hidden. The staff then kneel, begging for forgiveness for omitting her existence. The protagonist approaches the girl and asks her name. She replies that she doesn't have one, but the adults call her Nia, a name she hates. He praises her courage and comments that by blocking his path, she risked losing her head. Observing her behavior, he calls her a little beast cub and decides to rename her as Leonor Volio. The girl complains that the name is too long, and the protagonist reprimands her, saying that Leonor is just the first name. He picks her up and comments that he will need to hire a teacher for her as soon as they return to his territory. The girl struggles, trying to escape, while the man accompanying the protagonist observes, impressed that someone with such a peculiar demeanor managed to find a child to adopt. The girl asks him what his problem is and if he really thinks it's fun to mock her. Laughing, he replies that it is undoubtedly even more amusing than he imagined. The protagonist then mentions that Count Sis always talks about his son whenever he gets the chance. Additionally, he admits that he has been observing various families lately and has noticed that they all seem happy. This makes him wonder if having a family is really such a good thing. Curious, the girl asks if that's why he decided to adopt her. He confirms, and she is a bit shocked by the answer. Then she asks, don't adoptions usually happen when someone can't have children or when a child is meant to replace a lost one? She takes the opportunity to accuse him of being an idiot for adopting her just because his friend suggested it. He retorts, weren't you the one who appeared in my path asking to be adopted? She admits it. In her thoughts, she recognizes that she has finally managed to escape the terrible orphanage where she lived and that, in the end, her risky decision worked out very well. After a brief silence, the girl tells the Duke that she has a request. She explains that the orphanage administrators have been embezzling money. The Duke agrees, saying that it makes sense. She then reveals that the directors physically abused her and, in some cases, called in pimps. Intrigued, the protagonist asks, do you know what a pimp is? She responds firmly, it's someone who sells people to bars. She then adds, one of my sisters from the orphanage is about to be handed over to one of them. Then, she asks if he could punish those men. The protagonist cautiously questions, and you want me to punish all of them? She replies without hesitation, yes, except for Miss Coney. She never did anything wrong and was always kind to everyone. He asks if she is the woman with brown hair and scars on her fingers. The little girl confirms and, curious, asks how he knew. The protagonist explains that she was the only person who showed any concern for the children. The girl then reveals that the orphanage director always beat her when he was drunk. The protagonist, concerned, asks if the injury on her arm was caused by the director. The girl denies it, explaining that it was caused by another teacher, while the marks left by the director were on her back. Then she asks him to punish everyone responsible for this. When the protagonist asks how she would like them to be punished, the girl suggests that he torture them until they beg for forgiveness. Surprised, the Duke wonders if that little girl is really only 5 years old. The protagonist then calls a man named Lupe and orders him to stay behind and deal with the entire situation at the orphanage. The girl, without hesitation, adds that he should break the arms and legs of everyone except Miss Coney, who is always kind to the children. Additionally, she points out that the evidence of embezzlement is stored in the safe behind the picture frame. Impressed, the protagonist comments that she has an incredible spirit. One of the men jokes, suggesting that perhaps she is a lost biological daughter of the Duke, but Lup ignores it and says they should get started. In the carriage, the girl seems thoughtful. The Duke's knight, Nalais Levup, knocks on the window and warns him about the need for a stop. She suggests resting at the nearest inn, as the girl's condition is not good. The girl, however, insists that she is fine. The protagonist, amused, comments, you have a great voice for someone who's hungry. Upon arriving at the inn, he thinks it will be a good place for the girl to rest. He instructs Levup to prepare to continue the journey as soon as the child recovers. However, as Levop steps out of the carriage, she trips, but the protagonist reacts in time, catching her before she falls. She jokes that she thought she was going to die, praising his quick reflexes. Levop offers to take care of the girl. He suggests starting with a hot bath. Upon hearing this, the little girl calls Levop big sister and asks who she is. The knight introduces herself as Melise Levop but says the girl can call her just Melise. Impressed, the girl asks if she is a knight, and upon hearing confirmation, she comments that it is very cool. Levop smiles, thinking about the child's charming personality. During the bath, Melise notices the scars on the girl's back. The little girl comments that the wounds hurt whenever she lies down but that she is used to it because she was beaten before even recovering. Levop asks her to close her eyes and carefully pours water. She reassures the girl, saying that with rest and good nutrition, children her age heal quickly. Melise mentions that she has a great remedy, as her brother often gets hurt, and says she will apply it to Leona as soon as the bath is over. The girl, curious, asks if she really has a younger brother. Melise confirms, saying that he is a real troublemaker and, therefore, always ends up hurt. After her bath, Leona glows with joy as she admires the dress she received. She comments that the scent is wonderful, the best she has ever smelled in her entire life. The protagonist, observing her, teases, "Even clean, you're still ugly." Irritated, Leona tries to kick him and asks if he has something against her face. He replies that he doesn't but admits he's worried since she is now his adopted daughter. He then adds that he has never had to put up with something for a long time in his life, and Leona thinks that's exactly what he'll have to do while raising a child. While Leona sleeps, Melise speaks with the Duke. She explains that the level of physical abuse the girl endured is evident. Based on the marks on her body and what Leona shared, it seems she was continuously beaten for a very long time. Melise also points out how small Leona is for her age, which suggests she wasn't properly nourished. Concerned, the Duke orders her to send a message to the orphanage demanding the presence of anyone who harmed the child. He promises to deal with those people personally. Later, Leona is thrilled to receive another dress, and Melise comments that it looks wonderful on her. The protagonist, observing her, remarks that she finally looks like a person. Offended, Leona protests, saying she has always been a person and that he should praise her at moments like this. Indifferently, he asks why he should compliment someone who isn't even pretty. Irritated, Leona retorts, "You're so cruel, mister. Aren't you my dad now?" The Duke replies that if that's the case, she should stop calling him mister. Leona explains that she's not used to calling him father yet, and he admits he's not accustomed to giving compliments. He suggests that if she wants to be praised, she should gain some weight. Melise decides to check on the carriage preparations and, outside, speaks with the knights to confirm everything is ready for departure. She seems thoughtful, and one of them asks if something is wrong. Melise mentions that the Duke isn't acting like himself in Leona's presence but doesn't elaborate further. Shortly after, the Duke appears carrying Leona in his arms. Upon finding the knights at the door, he asks what they are doing there. They apologize and inform him that breakfast will take a little longer. During the meal, Leona eats so much that she burps, feeling satisfied as she marvels at having meat for breakfast, lunch, and dinner. She asks the Duke what to do if she ends up vomiting. He responds that, in that case, she should simply vomit. Leona comments that the carriage is very expensive and it would be a waste, as well as a hassle for the cleaning staff. The Duke reassures her, saying she doesn't need to worry because she is now the young lady of the Coldavolio house. He explains that he collects enough taxes to buy a new carriage with every breath she takes. Amused, Leona laughs and says he's very kind, though she would rather not vomit since it hurts. She adds that a person should know how to be rich at heart. The Duke, finding the idea nonsensical, comments on it. Leona agrees, saying it's something poor people say to make themselves feel better, but admits that he understands these things. The Duke observes Leona and reflects on how much he'll need to provide for her. He recalls a phrase Leona once said and concludes that she is quite a peculiar child. During the journey, Leona mentions that she likes the knight Melise, and the Duke agrees, noting that she is an excellent professional. He considers how Leona will need many things: teachers, a personal guard, and even an exclusive maid. With that in mind, he considers Melise as a strong candidate to be her personal guard. Shortly after, he asks Leona if she's ever traveled through a portal. She begins to feel unwell and vomits. Concerned, Melise asks if she's okay, while the Duke comments that she's rather weak. Leona recalls his explanation of what a portal is, a kind of tunnel that allows travel over long distances in a short amount of time. He also mentioned that it's common for first-timers to feel nauseous. Leona tries to reassure herself, thinking she'll be fine since the Duke said no one dies from nausea, but she still calls him insensitive for his remarks. When the Duke holds her again, Leonor asks him not to pat her back because it makes her feel like vomiting again. She even asks if she can vomit on his clothes, to which he incredulously replies, asking if she's joking. Shortly after, Leonor falls asleep in his arms, and he mutters that she's still ugly. The Glad Knights, known as the Guardians of the North and loyal to Duke Folio, watch the scene in surprise, as they've never seen the Black Beast show such affection for anyone. Arriving at a small town, Leonor, fascinated, comments that it's the first time she's seen something like this. The Duke explains that the place is much smaller than the capital, but Leonor admits she's never been to the capital and thinks this is the best place for her. Enchanted by the snow, she asks if it will get very cold, but the Duke assures her she'll get used to it. Upon arriving at the mansion, the servants prepare to receive them. A woman, introduced as Kara, the head butler, welcomes the Duke and appears intrigued upon seeing Leonor. The girl, for her part, is dazzled by the size and grandeur of the place. As the Duke holds her in his arms and the servants greet him as their master, Leonor feels uncomfortable with so much attention. Then, the Duke checks Leonor's back and comments that it should no longer be injured. The maids observe the girl, curious about who she might be. Leonor, without hesitation, declares that she is hungry. When he asks her to wait a moment, she calls him Mr. and, to his surprise, remarks that he has a robust chest. He reacts without knowing what to say. Inside the mansion, Leonor becomes even more enchanted by its beauty. She comments that murders always seem to happen in places like this, and the Duke, intrigued, asks how she knows that. Taking the opportunity, he mentions that the mansion has an underground dungeon and asks if she would like to see it, but Leonor refuses, saying there are probably insects down there. Kara, the head butler, notes that everyone must be tired from the journey. The Duke praises her work in maintaining the mansion during his absence and requests that renowned artisans and tailors be summoned. Surprised, Kara asks why. He explains that the mansion lacks a suitable space for a child and intends to change that. Kara observes Leonor carefully, and the girl introduces herself as Leon. The Duke corrects her, saying her full name is much longer, and asks if she has already forgotten it. Hesitantly, Leonor asks if she can really use that surname. The Duke teases her, asking if she plans to introduce herself using only half of her name. Then, with a bit of shyness, Leonor states her full name, Leonor Volio. The Duke smiles, visibly satisfied, and Kara thinks the scene is so adorable that she cannot look away. Kara reflects that she doesn't understand the situation but decides to head to the kitchen to arrange another meal. While doing so, she thinks the mansion will be chaotic for a while until everything adjusts. Among the maids, gossip begins. One of them remarks that the Duke has returned accompanied by a child, and another notes that the girl has black hair like his. This leads to speculation that the Duke may have had a lover. Nevertheless, they agree that, although the Duke is intimidating, the child seems sweet and harmless. Leonor appears, greeting one of the maids, who is surprised by how adorable the girl is. Shortly after, Kara calls for one of the maids, Connie, and informs her that she has been assigned the care for the young lady. Honored, Connie accepts the task. Kara emphasizes that the girl has suffered greatly and requires special care. Observing Leonor's thinness, Connie notices that the girl seems fragile but is captivated by her large, expressive eyes. Meanwhile, in the office, Kara confronts the Duke. She questions his decision to adopt a child on a whim and warns of the emotional responsibility this entails. Kara emphasizes that a child is not a pet to be taken in and discarded at will. She accuses him of treating Leonor like a toy, but the Duke, gazing out the window where he sees Leonor playing in the snow, responds seriously. He assures her that he knows the difference between an animal and a child and becomes irritated by the implication of irresponsibility. A knight present interrupts, questioning whether Leonor could have blood ties to the Duke. Clearly annoyed, the Duke firmly denies it. The knight, however, points out that Leonor's black hair is a unique characteristic of the Volio lineage, which will inevitably lead to rumors that she is an illegitimate daughter. The Duke ignores the provocation and, in a practical tone, states that, first and foremost, they need to feed the girl and stop bothering him with such speculations. Kara, somewhat relieved upon realizing that Leonor is important to the Duke, warns him about the rumors already beginning to circulate, especially with artisans being summoned to adapt the mansion to the child's needs. She asks how he plans to handle this. The Duke, after a brief reflection while observing Leonor exploring the house as though it were her own, decides to let people say whatever they want. Knight Malise attempts to argue against this approach, but the Duke cuts her off with a firm look. He explains that gossip doesn't concern him, as few people would have the courage to voice such comments openly. However, he warns that if anyone does, it will be an honor for Malise to stain her sword with the blood of the insolent. Shortly after, someone asks for permission to enter the Duke's office. Upon entering, they inform him that the guests have been brought to the hall as instructed. The Duke, with a dry tone, comments that it seems he has rather unpleasant visitors. Meanwhile, one of the maids asks Leonor if she had fun. The girl responds enthusiastically that she did, mentioning that the snow reached up to her ankles and seemed to grab her with every step. The maid offers to have the snow outside cleared, but Leonor refuses, saying she loved it and even plans to make a snowman later. Noticing her excitement, the cook approaches and asks if she would like a snack after playing so much. Leonor, enchanted by the appearance of the food, thanks her and takes a bite. She comments that it is delicious, and the cook encourages her to eat as much as she likes. Soon after, the knight Melise appears, calling for Leonor. The girl runs toward her, affectionately calling her big sister Melise. The knight gently scolds her, saying that a young lady of House Folio should not use honorifics when speaking to a knight. Leonor explains that she prefers to speak that way because it makes her feel more comfortable, but Melise insists that it is inappropriate. The girl then questions whether Melise didn't work hard to become a knight, leaving Melise visibly pleased by the recognition. Melise informs her that the Duke is calling for her, and Leonor jokingly asks if he wants her to do something cute again. Laughing, Melise says it seems even Leonor is having fun with this situation. Shortly after, Leonor discovers she has been given a horse as a gift and questions the Duke's extravagant habits. The maids begin to gossip, noting how Leonor and the Duke share the same way of speaking. When the Duke finds her, he encourages her to do something cute every day. Leonor, looking frustrated, asks if she can simply avoid doing so. He replies that he is trying to raise a child and threatens to expel her if she refuses. She retorts by calling him stingy. The Duke then asks when she will start calling him father. Hesitant, Leonor says she will try. As she contemplates how to do so, he rewards her with a sweet, telling her it is a prize for her cuteness. Observing the scene, Melise mentally comments that it is the first time she has seen him give something like this to anyone. Curious, Leonor asks why the Duke summoned her, and Melise explains that he wants her to see some people who are not good guests. Leonor asks why, and Melise clarifies that they are the ones who hurt her in the past. The knight suggests that if Leonor does not want to face them, she can go to her room, and Melise will explain to the Duke on her behalf. In the main hall, the Duke holds a list while several people are tied up before him. He asks what happened to the orphanage. Lup, the secretary, responds that the place was consumed by a fire, resulting in the death of everyone, including the teacher. He laments that if they had arrived earlier, they could have saved more lives. The Duke, impassive, burns the paper and stares at the prisoners. It is mentioned that the Volio family rules with a firm hand, even over royalty, due to a power known as beastly fangs, something beyond mana or aura. The Duke's eyes begin to glow as he activates this ability. Lup watches the scene silently, impressed. Leonor runs into the hall, and the Duke scolds her, saying she could get hurt. She counters that she is used to it because, at the orphanage, she always had to run away. He asks if she was often chased, and she confirms, explaining that she was beaten for any reason. She recognizes the secretary and briefly talks to him, showing that she is well and happy with her new life. Meanwhile, the orphanage's former teachers call out to Leonor. The Duke attempts to persuade her to offer a gesture of courtesy, while the orphanage director, also present, asks if she remembers him. He comments that seeing her like this reminds him of the day she arrived at the orphanage, describing it as a warm summer day. Leonor, however, ignores his words. The Duke, observing the interaction, states that as her adoptive father, it is his responsibility to deal with the guilty. However, before taking action, he suggests that Leonor greet them, should she have any desire to forgive them. Leonor hesitates for a few seconds but then firmly replies, "Why should I forgive them?" She declares that they are cruel people responsible for terrible acts and that it is time for them to pay for what they have done. She proceeds to point out each one of them. One of the teachers used to pinch her arms, another bragged about his family while mistreating the children, and a third embezzled the orphanage's money to spend it on married women. Concluding, she says, "You should have chosen to be good people." The director, visibly shaken, tries to argue. Leonor, with a serious expression, stares him down and questions, "Why did you treat me that way? Adults are supposed to protect children." She presses him further, demanding to understand his reasoning. During the interrogation, Leonor corrects him, "It wasn't summer when I arrived at the orphanage, but winter. The least you could do is remember that correctly." The Duke, silently observing the scene, notices something in Leonor's hands and asks what it is. Leonor responds that it is a gift for the guests, called a requiem. Lup, intrigued, questions whether she truly isn't the Duke's legitimate daughter, given their resemblance. He mentions that both her personality and her black hair make it difficult not to make such an assumption. Still determined, Leonor states that she won't accompany them until the end, as it was bad enough to have to see them again. She says, relieved, that confronting them felt like lifting years of weight, though the Duke reminds her that she is only 7 years old. Leonor retorts that it's just a figure of speech, provoking laughter from the Duke, who rewards her with another candy. Leonor jokes that bullying her teachers may have been her cute act of the day. The Duke, smiling, remarks that she is becoming more and more like a member of the Volio family, which makes her happy. The maids also praise her, while Luck looks confused and out of place, not understanding what everyone finds so extraordinary. Shortly after, Leonor suggests a creative punishment, tying up the guilty parties and hanging them from a cliff so they swing until they can't take it anymore. The Duke considers the idea and mentions there is a perfect cliff behind the mansion, but Leonor warns him they need to be healthy to suffer for a long time. She threatens to flick his forehead if he breaks that promise. Meanwhile, Lup recalls a rainy day when he investigated a carriage accident. He concludes that Leonor does not resemble Regina, a beloved figure from the Volio family's past, but he acknowledges something intriguing about the girl. Kara and the knight mention that the bodies from the accident were never found, hinting that perhaps Regina survived. The Duke, while bathing, reflects on Leonor. He remembers Kara's words that children are not pets. He thinks that calling Leonor a pet would be an insult even to a beast. He also reflects on the word requiem, something rare even among noble children, and concludes that he might need to investigate Leonor further. Considering her intelligence and behavior, he wonders if she could be a genius. Shortly after, Lup tries to speak with the Duke but seems worn out by his overwhelming responsibilities. Leonor appears, knocking on the door, and Connie, her maid, suggests that the Duke is still bathing. Leonor decides to wait right there. While waiting, she asks Connie if she is afraid of the Duke. The maid admits that he is frightening but emphasizes that Leonor is precious to him, something Leonor hopes is true. Jokingly, she suggests that the Duke might end up as an old bachelor because of her, a comment he overhears and dislikes. Emerging from the bath, the Duke opens the door, and Leonor, surprised, begins making assumptions about what was happening. He denies everything categorically, irritated by her insinuations, and asks if she really believes he would lose popularity just for having a daughter. Leonor agrees that he wouldn't but advises him to meet someone special in the future. The Duke replies that, for now, it isn't a priority, and when questioned if it is because of her, he simply states that there is no one interested. He then picks her up, and she beams with a big smile. However, he puts her down and puts on his robe. Confused, she asks why he did that. He retorts, asking what she thinks motivated him. Then, he reveals that he cannot believe he is being harassed by his own daughter. Curious, he asks why she is there in the first place. She responds that she brought cookies she had baked. She explains that he had been working hard in the underground mine, and thinking he must be exhausted, she decided to make cookies with the help of the head chef. She adds that, since she always receives sweets from him, she wanted to return the favor. However, she admits that all the ingredients were purchased with his money. Leonor grumbles, "I hate it when you do that, you know?" She then demands that he return the cookies since he apparently doesn't want to eat them. Surprised, he asks who said he wouldn't eat them. Pouting, she says she has changed her mind and doesn't want to give the cookies anymore since she's in a bad mood. She later confesses that she's sad because she's out of money. The Duke patiently responds that his money is also hers. Leonor perks up and admits she was joking earlier. Lup, who has been observing, wonders if they have both forgotten his presence. Shortly after, Leonor bids farewell to the Duke and leaves. The Duke, turning to Lup, questions why he is still there and the purpose of his visit. Lup then remembers that he wanted to speak about Leonor. Lup mentions that he wishes to discuss Miss Leonor's origins. The Duke, impatient, asks if this matter hadn't already been settled. Lup insists, suggesting it would be wise to investigate further. The Duke questions why he should even listen. Lup urges him to remain calm and, before continuing, notes that he is putting his reputation at risk. He suggests that Leonor might be related to Miss Regina. The Duke retorts, reminding him that Regina is no longer among them. But Lup persists, arguing that her body was never found and that she could have fled that day with her lover and conceived the girl. The Duke reflects on this possibility and admits that it makes sense, deciding to investigate Leonor's past. Meanwhile, Leonor, in another moment, talks with Connie about the cookies. Leonor asks if the Duke will like them, and Connie enthusiastically assures her that he will, since Leonor made them with love. Connie adds that it was a chaotic day, but Leonor acted incredibly. Slightly unsure, Leonor asks if she really thinks so, and Connie confirms it. Connie takes the opportunity to say that it is now time to rest and that if Leonor needs anything, she only has to ring the magical bell, which all the servants will hear. She explains that the bell was created with magic and shows it to her. Leonor, impressed, observes the object and comments that it is interesting. Connie agrees but mentions that it is very expensive. She then bids Leonor good night. Leonor, thoughtful, recalls having seen children using similar bells during a performance in her past life. Thus, it is revealed that Leonor had been reincarnated. Finally, Lup brings up the conversation about Leonor's origins once again, leaving the Duke curious and intrigued. Even after hearing Lup's thoughts, the Duke asserts that he is now even less inclined to investigate, as they had found Leonor at the orphanage. Lup questions whether, in that case, it wouldn't be important to confirm her lineage. The Duke responds, "And if we confirm it? Do you intend to tell her that her parents are already dead?" He adds that, if Regina were indeed her mother, that would not be positive for Leonor. He reflects on the implications: the daughter of a woman from the Volio family who ran away with a man from an enemy family, or the illegitimate daughter of Duke Volio, the most powerful man in the Empire and Lord of the North? If Leonor had to carry one of these labels, the latter would clearly be less harmful. Lup admits that he may have been hasty, but the Duke notes that, at the very least, Lup brought up an interesting point. The Duke had never considered the possibility of Leonor being connected to Regina. He asks Lup if Leonor reminds him of Regina, and Lup replies, honestly, that she doesn't. In fact, he says Leonor looks so much like the Duke himself that it's almost frightening. The Duke reflects and confirms that this could be simple to confirm. He recalls the day he found Leonor at the orphanage when he saw a spark of light in her eyes. At the time, he thought it might have been Mana reacting unconsciously, but if it wasn't that, perhaps it was the beastly fangs. He concludes that if this is the case, it would be the greatest proof that Volio blood runs through her veins. Meanwhile, we see Leonor and the Duke eating together. He calls her and comments that she will have to postpone something next time. Leonor asks if it's because of the weather, and the Duke confirms, explaining that he can't let the nights freeze outside. He mentions they should have hung the clothes on the line the previous day. Leonor climbs down from her chair, and Connie helps her into a coat. Leonor thanks her and jokes that she looks like Superman. The Duke, intrigued, asks who Superman is. Leonor explains he's a guy who wears underwear over his pants. The Duke, surprised, comments that it sounds perverted. Leonor protests, saying it's not like that at all, it's just his personal style. She emphasizes that Superman's costume isn't that important and begins to imitate him. The protagonist teases that she'll end up breaking her nose that way. Connie hands Leonor a book, and the Duke notices the title, The Useless Life. He asks if she wouldn't prefer fairy tales, but Leonor replies that those are too childish. The Duke argues that she should be reading that type of story at her age, but Leonor says she's already read all the fairy tales available. Surprised, the Duke asks where she got the book. Leonor explains that she found it in his study and reminds him that he said she could read anything she wanted. Curious, the Duke asks why she chose that book. Leonor replies that it was because of the title, which she found interesting, and comments, in my experience, life really is useless. The Duke reflects that she must have reached that conclusion on her own, considering what she went through at the orphanage. He then asks Leonor if she misses her mother. Leonor replies that she doesn't, as she doesn't even know who her biological parents are. She explains that she has no memories from before the orphanage and now considers him to occupy the role of her father. Leonor also reflects that she doesn't have any memories of the parents from the body in which she reincarnated. Finally, she thinks that the people you truly miss are those who inhabit the deep, secret spaces of your soul. And, unfortunately, she will never see them again. Leonor asks if she should remember them, and the Duke says it's fine if she doesn't. After that, he gives her another candy. He comments that, at the very least, she hasn't forgotten that he is her father. The Duke remarks that he had believed he would never hear Leonor call him father, not even in his final moments. Leonor replies that it's because she's not used to using that word. The protagonist, somewhat skeptical, says that her excuses are very convenient. Irritated, she asks why he is trying to provoke her again. He then asks to look into her eyes. Leonor, suspicious, imagines that he wants to start a staring contest. Then, the Duke activates the Beastly Fangs ability, and Leonor's eyes react immediately. She starts rubbing them, uncomfortable. The Duke orders everyone to leave the room and, in a serious tone, says he hates beating around the bush and prefers to be direct. He asserts that he believes Leonor might be his niece. Leonor is stunned, unsure of how to react, and says she is just an orphan he brought from the orphanage. The Duke agrees but emphasizes that there is a symbol of the Volio family within her body. Leonor asks if it couldn't be just a coincidence, but the Duke explains that black hair is an exclusive trait of the Volio bloodline. He reveals that he activated his fangs intentionally to test her reaction, as he found her interesting. He explains that the last time her eyes glowed, he thought it was just the flow of mana protecting her body, something common among young mages. He then asks if Leonor knows what beastly fangs are. She guesses it's when your eyes turn red. The Duke confirms and explains that, at the orphanage, her eyes glowed and resonated with his power. Leonor asks if the burning sensation she felt in her eyes earlier had something to do with that. She comments that, this time, it wasn't scary. The Duke explains that he wasn't trying to intimidate her, only confirm whether she possessed the ability. He adds, fangs resonate with other fangs. Leonor concludes that, in that case, she really must be a Volio. Confused, she starts pinching herself, trying to convince herself it isn't a dream. The Duke scolds her, saying there's no reason to pull at her cheeks. She asks who, then, would be the person who gave birth to her. The Duke replies that it was his cousin, the most irritating woman in the world. Leonor recalls that the story of the Black Beast was a novel she read in her past life. It was about the Lord of the North, Duke Volio, and his future companion, a lady from the Kon El Banu family. Leonor comments that she found the story amusing, though very cliched. She explains that one day she went to sleep and woke up in the orphanage as a little orphan girl. She realized she was in the world of the novel when she recognized the Volio family's emblem. Leonor decided to risk her life by introducing herself to the Duke, believing that becoming a servant of the Volio family would be 100 times better than staying in that terrible orphanage. However, she admits that the unfolding events were completely unexpected, even for her. Leonor reflects on whether all of this is truly positive and realizes that this revelation didn't happen like in the novel's cliches, such as during a breakfast scene. Later, we see Leonor running. Kara scolds her, saying she might fall as she keeps running like that. Leonor enters a room, closes the door, and tells Kara she is going to reveal a secret. Kara suggests she sit first and asks what the secret is. Leonor explains that she discovered who her mother is, the Duke's younger cousin. Kara asks how he discovered that. Leonor replies that it was thanks to the beastly fangs. Leonor notices that Kara looks emotional and asks if she was crying. Kara apologizes for her behavior, saying that the revelation deeply touched her. She thinks to herself that this means Regina really is no longer in this world. Leonor asks if the Duke hated Regina. Kara denies it, explaining that Lady Regina was an extremely dreamy person who had little grasp of reality. Kara adds that, although Regina was kind and free of major flaws, always seeking love and peace, her romantic and carefree personality sometimes irritated the Duke. Kara comments that Regina was always loved wherever she went. She explains that Regina genuinely cared for the Duke, and since neither of them had siblings, perhaps that motivated her to get closer to him. Regina often asked questions and would beg him to play together. Kara assures Leonor that there were no ulterior motives behind Regina's actions. Leonor reflects, thinking they must have been completely incompatible. She then asks how distracted Regina was. Leonor remembers that, based on what she experienced in her past life, few things are as sad as a naive idealist. She concludes that the fact Regina isn't even mentioned in the novel she read shows how indifferent the main protagonist was to her. To him, his younger cousin was an insignificant presence, as if her existence made no difference. Even so, Leonor feels a certain pity for Regina. Curious, she asks Kara what happened to the Duke's cousin. Kara replies that Regina ran away, revealing that she fell in love with a wandering knight. Naturally, the family opposed the relationship. Still, Regina turned her back on her lineage and left with the man she loved. Leonor realizes she shouldn't have brought up the subject. Kara asks if she would have liked to meet Regina, but Leonor doesn't respond and simply thanks the maid. The Duke, in turn, asks if that was the extent of her curiosity about her parents. Leonor responds frankly, "Do you want me to get attached and cry for people I don't even remember? It's not my style to live in the past. The only thing that matters is what's around me right now." The Duke reflects on her words and comments that Leonor is much more like him than Regina, which relieves her. "Good," she says. "That means I'm not clueless." She confesses that she does miss her teacher and her friends from the orphanage. The Duke explains that the orphanage was in Volio territory and promises to take her there as soon as the weather improves. Surprised, Leonor asks if he's serious, seeking confirmation. He assures her that he is, though she notices he hasn't seemed as busy these past few days as he should be. The Duke scolds her for letting crumbs fall as she eats. He points out that she should be wearing an apron. Leonor protests, saying it's not an apron but the dress's design. He counters, mentioning that she even drooled while eating. Irritated, she defends herself, saying it only happened once, and he responds that he never did that, not even when he was a child. You always have to win, don't you? Leonor questions. The Duke merely smiles and tells her she should learn from him. She glares at him and asks what exactly she is supposed to learn. He takes the opportunity to inform her that he will need to leave for a while, explaining that the monster season is about to begin. The Duke states that Volio territory is known as the Monster's Den because of the sheer number of dangerous creatures. Once the snow stops, he will take his knights to hunt and reduce the monster population. As he ties a ribbon in Leonor's hair, he comments that if the weather remains stable, he will return quickly. Otherwise, the mission will be prolonged. He promises that, on a future occasion, he will take her with him. Leonor asks why he would do that, and the Duke responds that she is his successor, which justifies her presence there. Skeptical, Leonor says he just made that up and asks why he doesn't plan to get married. He replies, jokingly, that raising a child is more fun. Leonor teases him, insinuating that he and Lup might have something special. Offended, the Duke declares that there will be no more snacks for her if she brings up that topic again. She laughs, admitting it was just a joke. Shortly after, a maid brings cookies, and Leonor thanks her. The Duke comments that she still uses honorifics when speaking to the servants while speaking casually with him. Leonor asks if he wants her to be formal with him as well, but he replies that it would be unpleasant. However, he insists she needs to correct that habit. Leonor jokes that time solves everything, to which the Duke retorts that money solves everything and, dramatically, threatens to fire all the servants if she doesn't change. Perplexed, Leonor realizes he is willing to take his joke far too seriously. Later, the Duke decides to introduce Leonor to the knights before their subjugation mission. She grumbles about the cold and reminds him that he told her she needed to gain weight. Ignoring her, he lifts her into his arms and carries her to the location. As she walks alongside the Duke, Leonor thinks that, although he is handsome, his personality is chaotic. She remarks that he's the typical protagonist of a novel but with a difficult temper. Half joking, she asks if he could suddenly throw her out. He looks at her and replies firmly, "You are my daughter, and I will be responsible for you until the end." Leonor turns to the Duke and comments, with some humor, that she hates fathers who joke about their daughters. The Duke gives a slight smile, but the moment is interrupted by a distant shout. He holds Leonor firmly and points to something, asking her to look closely. Curious, she asks what the giant lion carved into the ceiling is. The Duke explains that, according to records, it was the work of one of his ancestors. Leonor, startled, comments that the figure would probably give her nightmares. The Duke, on the other hand, wonders if she's being serious. Leonor then asks why they are in such a high place. The Duke responds that it would be dangerous if the ceiling collapsed after an aura release. Confused, she asks what this aura is. He explains that it is energy accumulated in the body and transformed through rigorous physical training. He adds that while mages are born with great mental capacity and magical ability, aura is acquired through physical training but also requires natural talent. He mentions that only 3 knights in the Gladius Order can use aura. Curious, Leonor asks if the Duke is one of them. He answers sarcastically, saying he doesn't need aura since he was born with something far superior. Leonor quickly deduces, "You're talking about the beastly fangs?" He smirks, teasing her, and she comments that he is incredibly irritating. The Duke takes the opportunity to reveal that she also possesses dormant beastly fangs and will need to learn to use them. Leonor, joking, says that once she awakens those fangs, the first thing she'll do is bite him. The Duke counters that it's more likely he'll bite her first. Without thinking, she blurts out that she would start by biting his chest. The Duke is speechless at the comment and asks why she is so obsessed with that. Embarrassed, Leonor declares she's not obsessed and that he shouldn't insinuate she's a pervert. Then she shouts, "I like strong, well-defined muscles." Her shout echoes through the area, catching the attention of the knights who pause their training. Confused, they wonder where that voice came from. Shortly after, the Duke appears, accompanied by Leonor. One of the knights greets him formally, saying, "My lord." Meanwhile, Leonor observes the knights with interest, and the Duke, in a teasing tone, comments that the knight in front of her, despite being robust, is married. Leonor looks confused as to why he brought that up, and the Duke explains that it means the knight cannot be her favorite muscle. The Duke gathers the knights and introduces Leonor as his daughter. He explains to her that these are the Gladius Knights, responsible for protecting the north alongside him. The vice commander, Manhwa, formally introduces himself on behalf of everyone. Leonor also introduces herself, proudly stating her full name, Leonor Volio. The Duke, satisfied, smiles and affectionately caresses her face. The vice commander reports that some young monsters attacked villages while the Duke was away from the territory, but he believes this year's hunt will be easier. The Duke comments that monsters that have recently given birth tend to be more sensitive and, therefore, easier to predict. As the knights prepare, Leonor asks to be set down on the ground. The Duke places her on the ground but orders her to stay by Mela's side. Annoyed, Leonor asks why she has to do that. He replies that it's better for keeping her obsession with muscles under control. Outraged, Leonor asks if he really thinks she's a pervert, to which he reminds her of the smile she gave earlier. Left with no choice, she sulks her way over to Melais. One of the knights comments on how healthy Leonor looks now and says it's a relief to see her so well adjusted. The Duke replies that this was to be expected since that house is also hers. Another knight mentions how Leonor's presence has brightened the atmosphere, and the vice commander asks if she has been officially registered into the family. The Duke confirms, which convinces everyone that he genuinely cares for her. Melais, emotional, remarks that she barely recognized Leonor because she looks so adorable. Leonor asks if she's being a nuisance, but Melais assures her she is happy to have her there. The knights then mention hearing something earlier and ask if Leonor really likes muscles. She responds enthusiastically, yes, which earns approval from some and laughter from others. It's noted that there were rumors about Leonor being adopted from an orphanage and that stories of her being the Duke's legitimate daughter were false. Despite this, the knights are relieved to see her happy and healthy, with a bright smile. Melais reflects that, while Leonor's smile isn't exactly innocent, few 7-year-old children show such excitement when talking about muscles. Leonor spends time getting to know the knights, while the Duke merely observes. At one point, he approaches the knights and casually asks if their children are like this too. Confused, the knights ask what he means. The Duke explains that Leonor is overly enthusiastic about muscles, which he finds peculiar for a child. Manhwa then comments that, in truth, children that age tend to like things adults find strange. He continues, explaining that his own children exhibited odd behaviors at that age. One of his daughters was fascinated by cookie packaging, while another knight shares that his daughter loved collecting stones and storing them on a chest as if they were treasures. Each knight begins sharing their own stories, reminiscing about the peculiarities of their children. The Duke realizes that this is the first time he has truly listened to such stories and feels an unexpected connection with the knights. One of them then asks if, now that the Duke is also a father, he worries about raising a child. The Duke smiles and remarks that Leonor is incredibly intelligent. He questions if any of their children have used the word defraudation at the age of 7. Furthermore, he reveals that Leonor has already read all the fairy tale books he gave her, over 50 volumes, in just 1 month. He finds this impressive, but also a little unusual. The Duke adds that, unlike other children who cry at the sight of him, Leonor is brave enough to argue with him. Yet, she also does sweet things, such as baking cookies as a gift. He notes that now that Leonor has gained some weight, she is starting to resemble him more. As the young heiress of the Volio family, she will always be surrounded by support and education. He reflects that he cannot help but wonder how many people she will charm with her bright face. The Duke gets lost in his thoughts about Leonor until he is interrupted by her animated voice, asking the knights to repeat something. Curious, Melais suggests that Leonor sing a song while the knights follow along in rhythm. Leonor eagerly agrees and begins singing a song about her love for muscles, mentioning chests, six-packs, and even glutes. The knights form a line and begin dancing to the tune, leaving Leonor ecstatic. The Duke, on the other hand, watches silently. Manhwa, the vice commander, remarks that while his children had strange habits, none were quite as peculiar as Leonor's. He adds that prodigy children tend to be a bit eccentric. Later, Leonor watches the snow through the window when Connie approaches and greets her with a good morning. Excited, Leonor comments that the snow is piled up so high that it's as tall as a person, the first time she has seen anything like it. Connie, however, replies that this year's snowfall has been small and recalls that, the previous year, the snow reached the second-floor windows. She explains that, during winter, the residents of the Volio mansion use only the upper floors because of the snow. Leonor reflects on the office where she and the Duke often relax, which is on the 3rd floor. Connie asks what Leonor would like to wear, and as she looks over the available dresses, Leonor comments that they are all beautiful. Later, Leonor finds the Duke and asks if he slept well. She has chosen a black dress for the occasion. In a teasing tone, she asks if he dreamed about her, to which the Duke replies that he doesn't think dreaming about her would be pleasant. Offended, Leonor says he's looking for a fight again and asks why he didn't ask if she slept well. The Duke responds that, judging by her good mood, he already knows the answer. During breakfast, The Duke helps Leonor serve herself and informs her that the monster hunt has already been scheduled. It will take place the next day, which he considers late since he should have gone that day. He adds that he will delay the departure to meet Leonor's new teacher. The girl freezes at the news, left completely speechless. Later, a carriage arrives at the mansion. An older gentleman and a young lady step out, greeted by Leonor and the Duke. The young woman introduces herself as Karina Tedros, the new etiquette teacher, while the older man, Ard, will be Leonor's history tutor. The Duke encourages Leonor to greet them, and she politely introduces herself. The Duke explains that Countess Tedros will visit Leonor once a week, while Ard will reside at the mansion. Leonor asks the Duke if there's anything she should watch out for with the teachers, but he replies that it's the teachers who should be careful with her. He adds that, as a young lady of the Volio family, Leonor never needs to worry, no matter what mistakes she might make. Curious, Leonor asks why someone as renowned as Ard accepted a position in the north. The Duke avoids answering and changes the subject. She then inquires about the Countess, and the Duke admits that she once admired him but praises her impeccable reputation in the social circles of the capital. He explains that those circles are battlegrounds of intrigue and that, inevitably, Leonor will have to participate in them someday. Although he sees it as unavoidable, he dislikes the idea of sending Leonor into such a world of rivalries. Sensing the Duke's melancholic tone, Leonor takes his hand and suggests they walk together. He agrees and, as they stroll, reflects on how Leonor, despite everything, is still just a child. Leonor promises to dedicate herself to her studies but asks the Duke to return quickly after the monster hunt. The Duke, in response, tells her that they will visit the orphanage as soon as he returns, and Leonor agrees. He advises her not to cry while he is away, but she assures him she won't. Then, he asks if she will miss him, and Leonor hesitantly replies that maybe a little. The Duke, smiling, remarks that she can't even be honest, but Leonor retorts that the same applies to him. On the day of the Duke's departure for the hunt, he is putting on his gloves when Leonor appears, looking as if she just woke up. He asks why she's outside so early and warns her that the cold might crack her lips. As he holds her, he notices how cold her skin is and scolds her for not staying in bed. Leonor explains that she came out to see him off. The Duke suggests she return to bed, but before that, Leonor hands him a basket of cookies that she secretly prepared during the night. He looks at the gift with curiosity and asks when she made it. With a sleepy voice, Leonor replies that she prepared everything while he was asleep. Proud, she says, "I'm still your daughter, aren't I?" Later, Leonor asks Lup if the Duke enjoyed the cookies. He confirms, mentioning that the Duke ate them all by himself without sharing with anyone. Leonor comments that she put special care into the portion meant for him, pointing out that the cookies with the black lion design were his favorites. Before he departs, Leonor wishes him a safe journey and asks him to bring back something tasty. The Duke, touched, reflects that there is nothing more delicious in the world than her cookies and that if there were, he would discard it just to ensure she remained unique. Before leaving, the Duke instructs everyone to protect Leonor, reminding her to study diligently, sleep early, eat well, and most importantly, control her obsession with muscles. He notices that Leonor has fallen asleep without answering and, resigned, calls for Garba, a loyal knight, to ensure her safety. Ready to leave, the Duke feels the weight of imminent longing and hesitates, attached to the small figure who has won his heart. The next morning, Leonor wakes up late after having gotten up early to see the Duke off. After dressing and having lunch, she asks Garber if Melais, the knight, also went on the expedition. He confirms, explaining that Leonor's protection is now his priority. Leonor asks how long they will take to return, and Garber comments that this year's hunt might be long, as the Duke spent the past 3 years in the capital, leaving the knights to handle the monsters alone. He explains that, while the monster numbers have decreased, the Duke's return makes everything more efficient. When mentioning the monster's last breeding season, Garber nearly swears but corrects himself, calling it the season of passion due to how intensely the monsters reproduced. Leonor, curious, comments that falling in love sounds wonderful, but Garber, flustered, changes the subject to avoid saying anything inappropriate around her. Later, Leonor meets Ard, her history tutor, who invites her to begin their lesson. During their conversation, he mentions that he was born in the North and, despite the region's challenges, the great mansions are well prepared for winter. Soon after, Countess Tedros begins teaching Leonor about etiquette, showing her how to greet other nobles. Leonor surprises the Countess with her quick learning, and the Countess remarks that she didn't expect such ease. However, she also suggests that Leonor must work on old habits, stating that her lessons will be crucial. Although Leonor smiles, she feels irritated by the Countess's critical tone and thinks to herself that this kind of nitpicking seems straight out of a romance cliché. Leonor asks her teacher, Mr. Ard, what kind of person Countess Tedros is. He begins describing the Countess while Leonor listens attentively. Ard mentions that he has heard the Countess enjoys reading and suggests that Leonor start reading a book on her own. He hands her a copy, telling her she can ask questions whenever she likes. Leonor reflects that a tutor's role seems to be evaluating the employer's child's knowledge, while the Countess's job is to test her critical skills. Feeling frustrated, she wonders how the Duke could leave her in the care of such people. However, she acknowledges that Mr. Ard has the qualities of a true tutor. She explains that, at first, he answered her questions based on the book she read, clarifying all her doubts until she felt satisfied. Over time, his approach changed. He began introducing new topics she hadn't yet studied, asking for her opinion and encouraging debates. This made the lessons significantly more challenging. Leona notes that occasionally, they would share meals or snacks during their studies. During one such conversation, Mr. Ard mentions the Esmaroca family, explaining that they are well known and own 2 mansions in the capital. Due to conflicts with other key nobles, they moved their base far from the north, diminishing their influence in the region. He further explains that key noble families, like the Volio, have protected the north since its earliest days and that many of these families descend from the Volio lineage. He adds that some members of this bloodline are born with beast-like traits, such as fangs, though this is rare. Mr. Ard asks if Leonor has ever experienced such subtle criticisms, and she takes a moment before responding. She recalls that, during the first weeks of lessons, the Countess ridiculed her for being an illegitimate child, sarcastically commenting that she was lucky to have been taken in by the Duke. The Countess's disdainful looks implied that Leonor's inferior origins would never change. Furious, Leonor questioned why the Duke chose someone like the Countess to teach her. However, Leonor confidently tells Mr. Ard that the Countess's tricks don't work on her. Determined, she declares that if the Countess wants consequences, she'll have them. Leonor plans to tell the Duke everything once he returns. Mr. Ard reflects that, despite Leonor's youth, she possesses the ferocity of a northern black beast. He compares her to the Duke, highlighting her cunning and cruelty when necessary. Later, Leonor prepares for bed. Connie, her maid, ensures she is comfortable and reminds her to ring the bell if she needs anything. Once Connie leaves, Leonor spreads the sweets she received across her bed, counting them one by one. She realizes that the sweets she earned for being cute outnumber the days she has spent at the mansion. Looking at the treats, Leonor reflects on her fortune. Once a scrawny orphan, she is now a young noble receiving love and care. She sighs, wishing the Duke would return soon, and falls asleep thinking about her etiquette lesson the next day. Meanwhile, the Duke faces a monster during the hunt. Using his beastly fangs, he defeats the creature and asks Karos, one of his knights, about the whereabouts of the offspring. Karos responds that they are not being tracked but mentions that the number of monsters in the area is surprising, considering they had already cleared the snowy mountains before. He adds that the monsters are reproducing more intensely this year. The Duke reflects on the monsters' behavior, realizing they are more aggressive than he remembers and noting the unusual absence of offspring. He decides to descend the mountain with his knights. Hearing his decision, the knights cheer, relieved that the mission is over. The Duke calls for Levap and asks where he can find something children like to eat. Levap responds that, while unsure of Leonor's taste, he knows a bakery adored by his younger brother. The Duke thanks him for the information and asks for the bakery's name. Levap replies that it's called Chalk Screen, soft as clouds. Back at the mansion, Leonor balances a book on her head during her etiquette lesson. Countess Tedros praises her progress and suggests ending the lesson there. Leonor bows, but she notices the Countess's haughty expression, which makes her think, here she goes again. Leonor had already noticed that the Countess's natural expression appears when she tilts her head, but she decides that today will be the last time she endures it. The Countess advises Leonor to remember everything she's been taught, warning that a single mistake can become a weakness. Tired of her insinuations, Leonor thinks that when she tells the Duke everything, he will surely punish the Countess. However, Mr. Ard's words echo in her mind. Wounds caused by words are not easily healed. She reflects on this but quickly decides not to let herself be affected. The Countess praises Leonor again but then comments that she needs to be more aware of her position. Irritated, Leonor asks directly what she means. The Countess replies that Leonor should be grateful to the Duke for providing her with such a luxurious life and that everything she has is thanks to him. She continues, saying that without the Duke, she would never have met Leonor and that the girl should strive not to trouble him. Leonor, maintaining her composure, addresses her as Countess Tedros and states that she has always taken her words seriously. The Countess, thinking it was a compliment, thanks her, but Leonor finishes, "That's exactly why I don't want to see you here again." As Leonor speaks, the Countess recalls her initial impression. From their very first meeting, she felt disgusted by Leonor. To the Countess, beauty is power, and she always knew how to wield her tools to get what she wanted. Confident in her charm, she believed she could win over anything, including the Duke. However, what she received from him was indifference and rejection. After that, she chose one of her best suitors, married, and lived a satisfied life. Still, rumors about the House of Volio piqued her curiosity. In the capital, the Duke was known for his strict discipline, and there were even whispers that he demanded contracts from his partners before any involvement. The Countess wondered whose illegitimate child Leonor could be, and driven by envy, decided to see the girl with her own eyes. Seeing Leonor bow, she thought she could endure everything as long as Leonor continued to lower her head before her. However, as she is dismissed by Leonor, the Countess is stunned by her composure. Leonor reminds her that the House of Volio does not need intruders who fail to recognize their position and warns that she will not accompany her to the door, telling her to leave on her own. When the Countess tries to protest, Leonor ignores her and walks away. The knights intercept the Countess and inform her that she cannot go beyond that point. The Countess tries to argue, claiming her words were misinterpreted. Leonor, impatient, asks what she meant. Nervously, the Countess replies that she may have unintentionally offended Leonor. Overcome with anger, Leonor loses control and manifests her beastly fangs, which had been dormant until now. A knight notices the danger and fears that if Leonor unleashes her full power, the situation could spiral out of control. Meanwhile, the mansion's servants begin to feel the pressure of her emerging ability, leaving everyone breathless from the increasing power radiating from Leonor. Leonor then asks if the Countess didn't say before that she always took her words seriously. The knight observes the situation and realizes he has been negligent, so he asks what exactly happened during the etiquette lesson. He warns Leonor that losing control would be a major issue. He asks if he can carry her, but Leonor replies that she would rather go for a walk. At that moment, a maid runs to her, insisting she take a coat. The knight holds Leonor and asks if she is feeling overwhelmed, but she remains silent. He notices that her beastly fangs, awakened by her emotions, are beginning to calm. He thinks that if they had safely gone for a walk, everything might have ended there, but things did not go that way. We then see Countess Tedros sobbing desperately as Leonor challenges her, asking if an illegitimate child will always be seen as worthless. Leonor recalls that on the first day of lessons, the Countess said something similar, and on the second day, she commented that Leonor should feel relieved for being lucky to be taken in. On the third day, the Countess insinuated that no matter how hard Leonor tried, she could never erase the fact of her inferior origins. Leonor then asks if the Countess really believed her filthy feelings could be hidden behind beautiful words. She adds that what the Countess said today was even worse, but the Countess apologizes, claiming it was all a misunderstanding. Leonor firmly responds that the Countess told her she needed to learn her position and not cause trouble for the Duke. Leonor challenges her to explain how those words could mean anything different from before because, unlike the previous days, the Countess did not hide her feelings today. She then demands to know what the Countess believes her position is if she sees her as a lowly bastard or a motherless orphan. The knight realizes the situation is out of control. He thinks Leonor's beastly fangs are completely unstable and that, because she is still young and inexperienced, this power makes her even more unpredictable. The Countess, in despair, continues crying, and the knight, unsure of what to do, realizes he must end the situation immediately. He recalls that the only thing capable of controlling beastly fangs is another beastly fawn, but he worries about what to do in the moment. Suddenly, the Duke arrives and is surprised by the chaos. He says he didn't expect Leonor to cause such a mess. Calling her an insolent daughter, he notes how relieved the knights look to be back at the mansion. One knight suggests they should celebrate, while another jokes that he can't wait to see his babies. The Duke, with a sarcastic smile, mentions that he could have asked a subordinate to fetch the sweets, but he went to the bakery himself because Leonor had asked for something tasty upon his return. Moments earlier, the Duke had entered the bakery and ordered the sweet chalk screen, soft as clouds. The bakery owner, visibly unsettled by the way the Duke made the request, looked uncomfortable. One knight comments that the baker probably won't sleep well that night, but the Duke, smiling, reflects that if Leonor doesn't protest, it will be a relief. He imagines Leonor waiting for him at the mansion's gate but concludes she is probably getting ready for bed. However, a concerned expression crosses his face as he suddenly senses someone using the beastly fangs. The Duke orders the knights to remain behind, knowing their presence would only make things worse since an untrained beastly fawn can be wildly unpredictable. Realizing the situation is spiraling out of control, the Duke thinks that if a child like Leonor can envelop the entire mansion with her fangs, it only means one thing: she is out of control. Arriving at the mansion, he finds everything in chaos and, surprised, observes the mess Leonor has caused. He holds her in his arms, seeing her panting, and reflects on how much trouble she gives him. He asks Garber what happened, and Garber apologizes for failing to protect the young lady. Garber explains that, while he doesn't know what Leona was thinking, he is certain that Countess Tedros deeply provoked her. Furious, the Duke demands to know how the Countess dared to be so arrogant in the House of Volio. He declares that if she insists on destroying herself, he won't hesitate to let it happen. Carrying Leona up the stairs, he uses his powers to make the Countess faint. Later, Leona wakes up in the middle of the night, feeling dizzy as she tries to stand. The Duke catches her and tells her to stay in bed, as she still has a fever. Leona asks when he returned, and he replies that he has been back for 2 days and that she has been asleep the entire time. She questions if it has something to do with her beastly fangs and apologizes for her behavior. Surprised by her formal tone, the Duke asks why she is being so polite, and she replies that it's because she feels she made a mistake. The Duke, curious, asks what kind of trouble she caused, and Leona explains it was related to the Countess. Realizing the situation is more serious than she thinks, the Duke asks if she used the beastly fangs on purpose. Leona denies it, explaining that she didn't intend to use her abilities but became enraged when the Countess spoke about understanding her position. Leona then asks the Duke what her position really is, admitting that she doesn't know anymore. She reflects on how, upon opening her eyes, she became a completely different person, a weak, vulnerable child. Remembering everything she lost, the things she held dear and the places she frequented, she confesses that, for a moment, she allowed herself to be overcome by the sadness of change. However, facing all the abuse and unfair treatment she endured, she didn't have time to suffer because her priority was survival. Leona admits that, at that moment, she resolved to make everyone pay for what they had done to her. Whether an orphan with no memories, a lucky adopted child, or the daughter of a naive woman who fled with her lover, she wonders if she was fortunate to have met the story's protagonist and received the name Leona as a gift. Although she feels comfortable in the mansion due to everyone's kindness, she still carries the insecurity that nothing truly belongs to her. The Countess's words, which she tried to ignore, only echoed what she had buried deep inside. The Duke calls her name, and Leona, startled, shouts, asking why he is laughing. He denies laughing, but she insists he shouldn't underestimate her just because she seems foolish. He retorts that if she knows she's acting foolish, then she's wasting her time thinking about useless things. Leona, suddenly, mentions muscles. The Duke, surprised, remarks that he can't believe she's bringing that up now, to which she replies that she just can't help liking them. The Duke says that if that's the case, then perhaps she isn't suffering as much as he thought. Meanwhile, we see Connie lying in bed, talking with another servant. When Leona enters the room, she asks what the young lady is doing there. Connie tries to get up, but Leona insists that she stay in bed since there's no need to stand. She says she only came to check if Connie was okay, offering her a package of cookies and apologizing for what happened. Leona asks if Connie was hurt during the incident, to which she replies that she's fine. The servant admits she was more worried about Leona and asks if she herself was injured. Leona shakes her head, assuring her she wasn't. Connie mentions that the Duke will punish Countess Tedros severely, and another servant adds that it's a relief because they finally got some rest. Connie then brings up the night Garba, prompting the other servant to tease her, saying that the young lady might have a crush on him. Connie denies it, explaining that she was simply grateful for his help that day. As the teasing continues, Connie becomes flustered and annoyed. The servant observes that Leona's expressions are becoming more and more like her mother's, and Connie jokes that they are only slacking off. She reassures Leona that she's been fine for days and says that, since Leona cared enough to check on her, there's no need for apologies, they're just grateful. Hearing this, Leona smiles. She runs through the mansion, calling for Pelika. When Leona's history teacher encounters her, he asks how she's feeling, and she responds that she's fine now. He comments that he always suspected that woman would cause trouble one day and recounts an old student of his from a noble family who suffered because of Corinne and her followers. He explains that the girl cried a lot afterward but never imagined Corinne would go so far as to provoke a bolio. He asks Leona if she values her life and adds that it's fortunate she discovered the Countess's terrible temper early on. A servant then chimes in, saying she feels no pity for the Countess, considering she brought it upon herself. The teacher agrees, stating that there's no reason to feel sorry. Leona, with a firm expression, declares that she feels no guilt either because it was the Countess who started everything. Admiring her boldness, the servant asks how she can be so fearless and courageous. Leona responds that such qualities are expected of a northern beast. The teacher remarks that such an attitude isn't necessarily beneficial for emotional development and asks how the Duke is doing. We then see the Duke in a meeting with several nobles. He approaches one of them and demands to know if they've lost their minds. Looking at Lup, he calls him Viscount Lupricos. After leaving the room, the Duke thinks to himself that he can finally escape that place. However, Leonor appears, pulling on his sleeve and calling him Uncle Luck. It's clear that, for being so wise and clever, Leonor has earned praise as a good child. The Duke, aware of the endless gossip about him, chooses to ignore it, affirming that this is what he wants. He admits that, because of this, he misjudged Karina Maroka, allowing her to stay near the child. He reflects that this made him realize he isn't so different from her. He recalls when Kara told him that a child isn't a pet. Seeing how everyone lost control in his absence, he concludes they're practically begging for their own ruin. The Duke calls out Count Tedros, asking what he thinks about all this. Nervously, Tedros tries to answer, but the Duke interrupts, asking about the Countess. Tedros immediately apologizes to the Duke of Volio. The Duke recalls Garber telling him that the Countess crossed all limits with her words, as well as the moment when Leonor collapsed. Lup then reports that he investigated the rumors about the young lady, as the Duke had requested. Lup reveals that several northern nobles are involved in malicious gossip. Furious, the Duke wonders if he should simply eliminate all of them. He sternly tells everyone to remember that he is showing mercy. Meanwhile, we see Leonor drinking tea and commenting on how delicious it is. Lup admits that he thought she would struggle with tea but feels relieved that she enjoys it. Leonor then asks Lup if he was hurt the previous day. He explains that he was just working in the office when something strange happened. His body broke into a cold sweat and his heart began to race. He tells Leonor that this was a sign of beastly fangs. Reflecting, Leonor remembers that, in that moment, she truly wanted to destroy Karine. She recalls reading that the beastly fangs were described as a power even greater than mana or aura combined. However, she finds this power terrifying and notes that people often become arrogant when they possess great strength. She cites aristocratic children as an example, who act superior due to their family's reputations. She observes that the nobles being reprimanded in the conference room fall into this very category. Lup, noticing that Leonor is reflecting on the impact of her power, tells her not to worry so much and to live more freely. Leonor protests that she isn't a child, but Lup insists that she still is. Shortly after, someone calls for Leonor, and she turns to see the Duke. She gets up and walks toward him, moving a little differently than usual. The Duke, noticing this, asks if she needs to use the bathroom and advises her not to hold it in because that isn't healthy. Leonor, irritated, replies that she's just being shy and asks if he doesn't realize that. Lup, observing, wonders what's going on. The Duke teases that for someone so shy, she sure knows how to scream loudly, almost deafening him earlier. Leonor snaps back, saying he knows nothing about women and suggests they go pick flowers. The Duke, perplexed, asks what flowers have to do with anything. He calls Lup and instructs him to prepare for the guests' departure. Lup replies that he will escort the guests outside and return afterward. Leonor and the Duke leave together, and she bids farewell to Lup. The Duke asks how she's feeling, and she responds that she's fine. He checks if she has a fever, but she denies it and even shows her forehead to confirm she's better. The Duke, amused, notices her smiling and comments on it, but when he mentions it, Leonor immediately stops laughing. The Duke asks why she stopped, and Leonor thinks it's because this is the first time he's seen her smile after crying. She admits that while she may look like an adult on the outside, she isn't one on the inside. The Duke observes that she seems to have gained weight, which Leonor confirms, and she bids farewell to Lup. The Duke asks how she's feeling, and she responds that she's fine. He checks if she has a fever, but she denies it and even shows her forehead to confirm she's better. The Duke, amused, notices her smiling and comments on it, but when he mentions it, Leonor immediately stops laughing. The Duke asks why she stopped, and Leonor thinks it's because this is the first time he's seen her smile after crying. She admits that while she may look like an adult on the outside, she isn't one on the inside. The Duke observes that she seems to have gained weight, which Leonor confirms. She says that Kara and Pelika mentioned she put on weight after falling ill. Leonor adds that she prefers muscles to fat and declares her intention to become strong. The Duke then begins calling her Leo, explaining that Leonor is too long to say all the time. He tells her it's just a nickname and that he'll call her that from now on. He asks if she understands why he calls her his daughter and family. Leonor replies that it's probably because he adopted her, but the Duke clarifies that it's because she chose to be part of his family. At that moment, Leonor realizes that all the thoughts she had about her identity were unnecessary. The Duke acknowledges that she has indeed endured many hardships and admits he didn't expect her to cry so much instead of simply snapping back at him as she usually does. When we see Leonor crying, she finally calls the Duke Papa. He encourages her to share everything she feels, from the struggles she faced at the orphanage to the loneliness she experiences when he is away for work. He also tells her to speak about the moments when she feels alone or gets lost in meaningless thoughts. The Duke then asks if she's done crying. When we see Leonor's swollen face, it's clear that she has cried for 2 full days. The Duke extends his hand to her and asks if she'd like to walk hand in hand. They begin walking together, and Leonor, calling him Papa, tells him that she likes him very much. The Duke asks her what she means by very much, and she explains that it's because she doesn't want to be teased anymore. The Duke reassures her that he won't hate her, even if she cannot fully express her feelings. Hearing this, Leonor smiles happily. She had always felt like she was in a strange world, as though she didn't belong in her own body, missing everything she once had. Despair often emerged when hope seemed to fade, and Leonor worried that the Duke's future might be threatened because of her. However, when she thinks of the Duke's support in her new family, she decides that all those memories and emotions will become nothing more than a fairy tale. She promises to store them in a place called Memories deep in her heart. Although she knows she might cling to them for a while, she is confident that she will eventually close the chapter and put it where it belongs. Shortly after, we see Leonor running toward the Duke, who welcomes her in a warm hug. A few days have passed since the incident, and Karina Tedros has lost her position, now referred to simply as Karina Maroka. It is said that the Maroka family sent her far away to a warm, beautiful, and isolated place surrounded by trees and forests where she could recover. This decision symbolizes that her family has essentially disowned her after the grave crimes she committed. Furthermore, it wasn't the only punishment. The families involved, including the Marokas, paid a large sum of compensation to Leonor. We then see Leonor singing cheerfully about the money she received. When she notices the Duke busy working, she calls for Kara and points out that her father is working. Kara asks if she finds it interesting to watch him, to which Leonor replies that she thought he only ate and played all day. At that moment, the Duke approaches and comments that observing his work is her responsibility. Leonor playfully points out that their clothes are the same color, but the Duke corrects her, saying that red and pink are very different. Leonor insists that they look similar, and the Duke concedes with a casual, "If you think so, then let it be." The Duke informs Lup that they will return before dinner, and Lup assures him he will organize everything by then. Kara asks what she should prepare for the meal, and the Duke tells her to make the usual. Leonor, however, requests something with chicken, and Kara guesses correctly that she wants the dish with creamy sauce. Excited, Leonor confirms, while the Duke, amused, tells her not to drool on his head. Moments later, we see the Duke and Leonor departing in a carriage. Leonor asks if it's the same one they used last time and celebrates that she didn't throw up in it. The Duke teases her, reminding her that, even so, an innocent tree was hit. Leonor retorts that the vomit acted as fertilizer, so the tree has probably grown a lot since then. Laughing, the Duke admits it's the first time he feels pity for a tree. Leonor counters that if she's shameless, it's probably because she takes after her father. The Duke fires back, claiming his conscience is as vast as a mountain range. Leonor agrees but quips that it feels more like a desert. When they arrive in the city, Leonor is fascinated by the hustle and bustle. The Duke calls her Leo and asks if she'd like to explore the area. She asks if she really can, saying that she wants to see more things. The Duke agrees, mentioning that he hasn't visited the north in 3 years and that this is a good chance to look around, especially since they're relatively close to the orphanage. Leonor, however, suspects that he's lying, thinking he doesn't actually like crowded places. When they step out of the carriage, Leonor jumps with excitement, but the Duke scolds her, warning that she might get hurt. Leonor responds that he worries too much, and the Duke explains that it's normal for parents to act that way. Leonor looks at him, smiles, and calls him Papa, asking if he'd like to pick flowers. The Duke laughs and reminds her that he still finds that expression strange, but Leonor defends it as a wise saying. Meanwhile, the Duke reflects on something Leonor's history teacher, Ard, told him. Ard commented that Leonor has the intelligence of an academy student, an impressive feat, considering the environment where she grew up. Having lived surrounded by mistreatment, harsh words, and constant violence, it was only natural that her childish emotions were buried deeply until they exploded suddenly. The Duke realizes he needs to start paying closer attention to her playful personality. As they walk, Leonor observes workers carrying crates and notes how their muscles differ from the knights, being more developed from daily manual labor. The Duke asks if she doesn't want to head to the orphanage, but Leonor replies that she's in no hurry and that it's fine if they're a little late. At that moment, a man approaches the Duke and politely greets him, addressing him as Your Grace. He attempts to introduce himself, but the Duke interrupts, already knowing his name, and calls him Viscount Sarada. The Viscount remarks that it's an honor to be remembered by the Duke and notes that they must have met before in the territory of Marquis Tren DRW. The Duke responds that it likely happened before his departure for the capital. The Viscount mentions hearing that the Master of the North had returned and, out of curiosity, asks why he's visiting such a place, given the rumors that the Duke dislikes crowded areas. The Duke explains that he came for a stroll with his daughter. The Viscount observes that the young girl seems quite entertained and, apologizing for interrupting, reveals that he, too, is out for a stroll with his own daughter. He introduces the girl as his second daughter, but the child, frightened by the Duke's presence, hides behind her father. The Viscount tries to reassure her, saying that the Duke is not scary. The Duke thinks to himself that, because of Leonor, he had almost forgotten how he usually causes this kind of reaction. Leonor then steps forward, and the Duke introduces her as his daughter. The Viscount apologizes to Leonor for the delay in greeting her and says he is happy to meet her. He introduces himself as Viscount Rubwa Serrata. Leonor, polite, returns the greeting, saying she is Leonor Volio. The Viscount introduces his daughter, named Flom, who, encouraged by her father, also introduces herself, "My name is Flom Serrata." The Viscount comments that his daughter will soon turn 7 years old. Leonor reflects that this makes sense since Flom still looks very much like a child. Confused, both Flom and the Viscount ask Leonor her age, and she replies that she is also 7 years old. At another moment, Leonor asks Connie, one of the maids, if she is too heavy. Connie responds that the young lady still needs to gain weight. Leonor retorts that she has already gained weight because her father called her a little piggy. Connie, trying to explain, says that the Duke meant she is cute like a piglet. Leonor jokes, but he also said I'd be ready to be slaughtered and eaten in 2 months. Later, Leonor teases her father, asking if he really likes her since he always mocks her. She then bursts into the Duke's room, saying, "Here comes your lovely daughter." The Duke, exasperated, asks if she has already taken a bath and suggests she sit properly, warning that poor posture might cause back pain in the future. Leonor replies with a mature tone, as if she were an elderly woman. Amused, the Duke carries her and puts her to sleep, but she wakes up asking for a candy. He gives her one, and Leonor stores it in a jar before wishing her father good night. Later, the Duke encounters Lupe in the corridor, who remarks that the young lady has already gone to bed. The Duke reflects that sleeping early is her only truly childlike trait. Lupe then comments that Leonor is adorable, but the Duke reacts irritably, asking who gave him the right to say that. Lupe, confused, replies that he didn't know complimenting someone's daughter could be offensive. The Duke shares that Leonor asked him whether Lupe would become her stepfather. Shocked, Lupe tries to understand why she would think that until he remembers an occasion when Leonor had walked in during one of their meetings. The Duke suggests that Lupe visit him less frequently, only in urgent situations, to avoid misunderstandings. Elsewhere, it is revealed that the Duke was preparing to face monsters for the first time in 3 years. Normally, the breeding season was already chaotic, but this year, the situation was worse. Hunters were even dealing with attacks from typically docile species. The cause of this behavior was the illegal monster trade, promoted by nobles seeking entertainment. These arrogant nobles believed that taming wild monsters was an impressive feat. However, the text reflects that this is a foolish idea, as monster cubs only seem docile because they are weak. Once they grow, they become aggressive, causing chaos and devastation. This recklessness only proves that none of these experiments have ever ended well. The value of monster bodies gradually became a source of conflict. In a conversation, Lupe informs the Duke that he recently investigated the movements of northern nobles. He comments that, fearing the Duke's warnings, these families chose to protect themselves, so he shifted his focus to monitoring the movements of their employees. The Duke acknowledges that Lupe has an impressive ability to uncover information. Lupe explains that he observed Count Maloca's family and Baron Grazy's family sending their workers to the same location. While the Count always sent the same worker, the Baron alternated between different employees, but the timing and number of people remained consistent. Intrigued, the Duke asks if Count Maloca is causing trouble again. He sarcastically remarks that the family is truly incredible at creating chaos, given their reputation as the flower of society. The Duke then asks which family they had met with recently. Lupe responds that it was the family of Count Tobanu. Hearing this, the Duke sarcastically comments that it seems an annoying fly is involved. Lupe notes that during the 3 years the Duke was in the capital, Count Tobanu acted as though he were the true master of the North. The Duke responds that this isn't even funny but quickly reconsiders, saying that, on second thought, it might be a little comical. Lupe asks if these families are part of the royal lineage. The Duke jokes that the royalty has a tendency to behave like flies, except for an ancient emperor, who is as noble as a black eagle. He ironically wonders if the 3 foolish sons of that emperor are aware of this. The Duke then declares that he will intervene in the matter, as he now has legal grounds to torment them. Lupe then comments that the Duke is becoming more like Leonor. The Duke quips that this might be because she is his daughter. He instructs Lupe to continue monitoring the families but to remain discreet for now. The conversation shifts when the Duke mentions Viscount Serrata. Lupe asks what he means, and the Duke explains that he learned the Viscount's second daughter is the same age as Leonor. Lupe recalls the meeting with the Viscount in the plaza and comments that the Serrata couple appears to love children. He adds that the Viscount is often seen carrying his daughter in his arms and suggests that she might become a good friend to Leonor. Both reflect, worried whether Leonor might negatively influence the girl. A few days later, the Duke receives a green letter sealed with a deer emblem. He notices that the message was sent by Viscountess Serrata, inviting both him and Leonor to a tea party. The Viscountess explains that several noble families with children have also been invited. The Duke tucks the letter away and asks where Leonor is. Cara, the maid, responds that she is in the sitting room. When the Duke arrives, he finds Leonor playing on a wooden rocking horse, but with a somber expression. Suddenly, she exclaims, "Bored, living is pointless." The Duke, surprised, calls her, and Leonor runs excitedly to him, showing off the toy. He says he saw it but looks disheartened. Leonor sits in front of him and declares that this is her spot. The Duke hands her the letter and explains that it's an invitation for the two of them. Leonor asks if it's about Viscount Serrata and his daughter, and she remarks that she found Flum very cute. The Duke reprimands her, saying that she shouldn't talk like an old lady. When Leonor reads the letter and discovers it is an invitation to a tea party, she protests, saying she doesn't want to go. The Duke tries to convince her, explaining that, as a child, she should run and play more often. Leonor replies that she prefers books and being alone, insisting that she is more mature for her age. The Duke, however, doesn't give up. He says he wants Leonor to make friends her age and interact with other children. She counters, saying that she already has friends, like the children from the orphanage. The Duke recalls how Leonor interacted with those children, protecting them, collecting them, and even praising them in a maternal way. He concludes that this wasn't friendship. Leonor acted more like a guardian. Looking at her with tenderness, he tells Leonor that she is his only family. Reflecting, he admits to himself that he never imagined she would have such a big influence on his life. Leonor asks the Duke if he is trying to pick a fight. The Duke replies that this is precisely why he wants to let her do as she pleases. However, Leonor thinks to herself that he isn't really letting her do anything and that, even if she looks like a child, she doesn't want to be treated like one. The Duke tries once more to convince her, saying her childlike innocence also has value. Leonor reflects for a moment and then replies aloud, reluctantly agreeing that maybe participating just once wouldn't be so bad. The Duke smiles and remarks that she doesn't need to make such a fuss since it's just an invitation, not a duel. Later, at Viscount Serrata's mansion, the Viscountess comments to her husband, "Even though we sent the invitation, do you really think the Duke will show up?" The Viscount replies, "And if he doesn't come? Is that really so concerning?" The Viscountess laughs and says, "We are talking about the Duke, after all. It would already be a relief if he simply used the invitation as firewood. At least the paper wouldn't have been completely useless." The Viscount tries to reassure her, "You don't need to worry so much. All this concern is unnecessary." The Viscountess changes the subject and mentions that she heard about the young lady Volio. "She's a small and adorable girl," says the Viscount. Despite being precocious for her age, she is still just a child. The Viscountess asks, "Do you think Lady Volio took an interest in our daughter Flum?" The Viscount responds that he believes so, since they had met in the plaza. However, the Viscountess notes that Flum is gentle but doesn't usually get involved directly with people. As they talk, the Viscountess suggests that it's time for bed. When she stands, the Viscount warns her, "What you really should be concerned about is the Duke himself. Do you know why they call him the Black Beast?" The next morning, the Duke and Leonor arrive at the tea party. A maid offers to take the Duke's coat, but the children present, upon seeing him, scream and run away in fear. Leonor watches the scene and starts laughing, teasing her father, "You made all the kids cry." The Duke asks, half serious, "Is it amusing to mock your own father?" Leonor thinks that, despite how difficult this is, it will be worth it to attend the party, as she won't be the only one suffering this time. They are greeted by Viscountess Serrata, who introduces herself as the host of the party. "It is an honor to welcome the Duke and his daughter to this humble gathering," she says politely. Leonor, imitating her father's formality, introduces herself. I am Leonor Volio, daughter of the Duke of the North. I look forward to getting to know you, and I thank you for the invitation. The Viscountess smiles and replies, the pleasure is all mine, young lady. I hope you have a wonderful time today. The Viscountess explains that the children are playing on the rug while the adults enjoy tea and conversation. She mentions that she organized a small event for the children to ride reindeer during the party. The Duke, however, looks visibly concerned and asks if there are any risks. Nervously, the Viscountess assures him that all safety rules have been explained to the children. Later, the Duke encourages Leonor to play with the other children. However, she refuses, saying she prefers to stay with him, drink tea, and eat snacks together. The Duke jokes, "Stop acting like a seductress." Leonor snaps back, "I'm not seducing anyone, I'm just showing off my adorable charm." The Duke sighs, hands her a bag of candies, and tells her to share them with the other children. Annoyed, Leonor makes a face and walks away slowly. Meanwhile, Flum, the Viscount's daughter, watches Leonor from a distance and hesitates to approach her. She remembers something her brother said. Leonor is the daughter of the Black Beast of the North. That makes her a beast too. Flum tries to understand what this means and asks about the story of Countess Tedrose, who went mad after confronting Leonor. Her brother explains that the Countess couldn't handle Leonor's beastly fangs and has barely been able to speak coherently since. Frightened, Flum asks what she should do if Leonor attacked her. Her brother laughs and says, "You'd simply be devoured." At that moment, the Viscount intervenes and scolds the boy for scaring his sister again. The Viscount tells Flum that she doesn't need to force herself to become friends with Leonor, but suggests it would be polite to at least greet the guest and thank her for attending the party if she feels comfortable doing so. However, he reassures her that if she doesn't want to, it's perfectly fine. Flum reflects and decides it will be okay since even her brother cried like a baby. Determined, she declares that she's braver than him and reminds herself that she already met Leonor before. Summoning her courage, Flum approaches Leonor and politely asks to speak with her. Upon seeing her, Leonor smiles and casually comments, "Oh, I forgot you were here at the party too." She then asks if Flum has grown since the last time they met. Flum feels a little shy but responds politely, offering her greetings to Leonor and thanking her for coming to the tea party. Leonor, in turn, reciprocates the gesture, saying she's grateful for the invitation. Flum mentions that there are plenty of cookies and sweet juices prepared especially for the party and suggests that, if Leonor wants anything, she can ask the nearby maids. She also mentions that, after eating, the children will have the opportunity to see some reindeer. Curious, Leonor jokes, "Reindeer? Like Rudolph?" Confused, Flum asks who Rudolph is, and Leonor explains that he's a reindeer with a red nose. Flum then says that, on cold days, reindeer often have red noses. Surprised, Leonor responds, "Interesting. Is that really true?" Flum continues, explaining that, in the summer, parasites lay their eggs in reindeer noses. This unexpected information leaves Leonor momentarily speechless, but she laughs internally, thinking that Flum sure knows a lot about reindeer. Flum confirms, "Yes, I know quite a bit about them. I really like reindeer." At that moment, Leonor reflects that perhaps the tea party isn't as bad as she had imagined. Flum continues, commenting that reindeer are gentle and beautiful creatures whose eyes change color with the seasons. When she begins to recount an occasion where her grandfather castrated a reindeer, Leonor quickly interrupts, realizing the conversation is about to cross some boundaries. Thinking fast, she suggests they eat some of the candy she had received from the Duke. Meanwhile, the Duke observes Leonor from a distance and asks Garber how she seems at that moment. Garber replies, "She seems like a good girl, caring for the friends around her." The Duke reflects, "That's more than enough for me." He observes her again and thinks, "She's still so small, even after eating so much and growing over the past few months." Shortly after, an older man arrives at the party, catching Garber's attention, who watches him warily. As the man approaches, he calls for Duke Volio, revealing himself as Marquis Fardu. The Duke greets him cordially, commenting that he didn't expect to see him there. The Marquis replies that it's been some time since their last meeting, which was in the capital. The Duke laughs and jokes, saying they saw each other so often at the royal palace that he grew sick of it. The Marquis laughs, amused by the comment. From a distance, Leonor watches the conversation and wonders who the older man could be. She thinks it's impossible that Dad has other friends besides Count Linder. Who is he? A nearby boy comments, "That's my grandfather." Curiously, Leonor asks who his grandfather is, and the boy replies, "Marquis Fardeau." Surprised, Leonor is momentarily stunned. At that moment, we are given a brief history of the continent. In the past, it was divided into 5 regions: Central, East, West, South, and North. The king of the central region dreamed of uniting the entire continent, persuading nobles from each area by granting them titles. Over time, the continent was unified except for the north. The north, rich in minerals and resources, was highly coveted by the royal family. However, the black beasts inhabiting the region were so powerful that they defeated any army sent to face them. Surprisingly, it was the north that extended a hand in search of a peaceful agreement. The conditions imposed by the north were twofold. The northern region would have absolute autonomy, and marriage between northern members and the royal family would be forbidden. These conditions did not please the empire, but they had no choice but to accept. This agreement is said to define what the Boss Empire has become. However, at the time of the nation's founding, the imperial family imposed one condition on the north. They must accept a noble sent by the empire. Returning to the scene, the Marquis comments that his grandson will turn 8 years old that year. He explains that the boy is the son of his eldest and that he finds him absolutely adorable. Hearing this, the Duke jokes, "It seems you're quite the doting grandfather." The Marquis shrugs and replies, "I can't help it. He's my first grandson." Meanwhile, Viscountess Serrata watches the conversation from a distance as Leonor approaches the Duke, calling him daddy. She informs him that she's going to see the reindeer now, and the Duke hands her another bag of candies, asking her to share them with her friends. Leonor, however, says she doesn't need the candies because she doesn't think she'll be able to eat anything while looking at the reindeer. Curious, the Duke asks, "And why wouldn't you be able to eat?" Leonor remembers an unpleasant fact Flum shared about reindeer but decides not to tell the Duke. She simply replies that she has no appetite. At that moment, the older man comments, "So this is the Lady Volio everyone talks about." Hearing this, the Duke becomes irritated and asks, "Why are you talking about rumors?" The Marquis apologizes, recalling how sensitive the Duke is to such comments, and introduces himself to Leonor. Speaking politely, he calls her the Duke's adorable daughter. Leonor thinks to herself, "So this is him, the Marquis, the protagonist's greatest assistant in the novel and, on top of that, the grandfather with the worst personality." The Marquis observes Leonor with a smile and comments, "She's such a lovely child." It's easy to see why the Duke always wants to hold her in his arms. Leonor responds, "I like muscles more than I like my father." Ignoring the comment, the Duke suggests Leonor hurry up and go see the reindeer. He tells her to take Garber along, who accompanies her. On the way, Garber asks if Leonor is having fun with her friends. She replies, "Maybe. I've learned some interesting things here." Curious, Garber asks, "Really? Want to tell me what you learned?" Leonor, with a mischievous look, whispers to him why reindeer noses are red. After hearing the explanation, Garber looks shocked and Leonor bursts into laughter. Meanwhile, the Duke watches Leonor from afar, wondering what she's doing. Leonor, in turn, thinks about the Marquis and reflects, the law of the jungle is the main rule. The Fardu family is one of the many that follow this principle. Initially, they came to the north as spies for the imperial family but were so fascinated by the Volio's power that they switched sides without hesitation. Arriving at the reindeer area, Leonor sees several children gathered around one. She finds it impressive that the Marquis escaped unscathed despite being a double agent and decides she doesn't want to stay too close to him, considering him treacherous. Nearby, the Marquis comments to the Duke, "I rarely get moments like this to relax." The Duke, with a sarcastic tone, replies, "Isn't that normal?" The Marquis sighs, "Perhaps, but winter in the north is incredibly exhausting. I'm just waiting for the day I can stop working." The Duke suggests, "Then you should return to the capital." The Marquis shakes his head. "I'll live here for the rest of my life. I don't want to see the fool lounging on the throne in the capital." Later, Leonor rides a reindeer. Fascinated, she says the animal is gentle and cute but then asks, "Can you eat reindeer?" Everyone looks awkward, especially the Viscount, who answers sheepishly. In the end, Leonor approaches the Duke, who picks her up and comments, "You smell like reindeer." She laughs and replies, "That's because Tutu kept poking my face." Curious, the Duke asks, "Who's Tutu?" It's the reindeer's name. She's a female and has incredible muscles. The Duke sighs and mutters, "Here you go again with the muscles." The Duke asks Leonor if she can't see things in a healthier way. In response, she asks if being curious about how reindeer taste is healthy. Hearing this, he tells her that when they return home, she must read 2 fairy tale books and write a summary. Surprised, Leonor asks why she has to do that. Observing their interaction, the Marquis comments, "You two really seem like father and daughter." Leonor replies that she doesn't like fairy tales and would rather summarize her favorite book. The Duke retorts that he's doing this for her, to which Leonor responds that he should do it since he seems to have even less childlike innocence than she does. Of course I do, I'm an adult, the Duke replies. Leonor insists, well, I'm an adult on the inside too. The Duke laughs and says, looks like we have a child with an old soul here. Leonor stared at her father and then announced that she had made a new friend. Curious, the Duke asked who it was. She replied that it was Flom Sovada. He confirmed, are you talking about the young lady from Viscount Sovada's family? After some thought, he commented, it seems this friendship is a good thing for you. Leonor mentioned that Flom was a good child but also a liar. The Duke scolded her, saying she shouldn't say such things, as older people often use that kind of argument. He assured her that Flom would be a good friend. Why are you suddenly praising her so much? Leonor asked. The Duke explained, because she is kind and intelligent. I'm sure she'll be a good friend to you. At that moment, the Marquis interrupted, and what do you think of my grandson? Leonor thought it felt like a lesson about friendship. After observing the boy, she said he was polite and kind. The Marquis smiled and commented, you speak like someone much older. That's because I am, on the inside, Leonor replied. The Duke, intrigued, asked, and is that something to brag about? Leonor seized the opportunity to ask if he was close to that grandpa. The Duke denied it, but the Marquis contradicted him, we're quite close. Irritated, the Duke turned to Leonor. Why do you ask such pointless questions? It wasn't pointless, she shot back. Leonor began thinking about the Marquis's role in the story and concluded that he often appeared during significant events. She believed that today's meeting might mark the start of a new development. Although she wasn't too worried about her father, the strongest person in the world, she knew her presence in this altered story required preparation. Suddenly, Leonor called the Duke and asked, how old are you? Quick as always. I'm 27 years old, he replied. Surprised, Leonor let out such a loud scream that even the servants jumped in fright. Are you serious? You're not lying to me, are you? She asked. The Duke chuckled and replied, why wouldn't you believe me? Are you shocked to find out I'm so old? Leonor revealed, I thought you were already over 30. The comment irritated him slightly. She then shouted, how is it possible that you're only 27 but look like you've lived 3 lifetimes? How much hard work does someone have to endure to look like that? Garber, who had been watching, silently prayed that Leonor would stop talking. Meanwhile, Leonor pressed on, are you sure you know how to count? Or did you forget because of your age? The Marquis began to laugh but tried to hide it. At that moment, Leonor pointed to a small scratch on her forehead and demanded the Duke's attention. He asked how she got hurt, and she jokingly replied, it was you, Daddy. You hit me. The Duke shot back, you deserved worse. How can someone so strong think of hitting their own daughter? She teased. The Duke sighed, picked Leonor up, and examined her forehead, asking if it hurt. She replied that it did. He laughed and said it didn't look so serious. Daddy, honestly, it hurt so much I thought my forehead was splitting open, she exaggerated. As he looked at her, the Duke started to feel guilty, thinking he shouldn't have been so harsh on his precious little thing. Still, Leonor returned to her teasing, why do you look older than you actually are? That question left him momentarily silent. A moment later, the Duke offered Leonor a sweet, which she began to eat. Suddenly, she shouted for him. What is it now? He asked, already concerned. Leonor curiously asked, what about the person who gave birth to me? The Duke replied, are you asking about your mother, Regina? Leonor wanted to know how old she was when she ran away, prompting the Duke to reflect on the question. The Duke fell silent for a few seconds, clearly trying to recall. After some mental calculations, he concluded that Regina had been only 16 years old at the time. Leonor, noticing his silence, called for him and said she thought he considered her someone full of ambitions and dreams. The Duke confirmed with a simple yes. Leonor then declared that she was also someone with ambitions and dreams, but the Duke cut her off, saying it was better to end the conversation there. He firmly added, something like that is completely useless, and I'd rather die than see you pregnant at 18. Later, we see Leonor again, this time reading a book titled Life is Completely Useless. She thought to herself that it was truly surprising but also impressive. In a mix of irony and reflection, she commented that her mother had gotten pregnant very early. At that moment, Coney appeared, calling Leonor for lunch. She replied that she would come soon. We then see Leonor and Coney walking together down the corridors. As they walked, Leonor began to think that the real problem was her biological father, as he was the one who had coerced a young girl in the past. Determined, Leonor declared that if she ever met that man, she would make sure to teach him a proper lesson. Upon reaching the kitchen, Leonor saw the Duke. Without hesitation, she ran to him but was immediately scolded. He reminded her that he had already told her not to run like that. Leonor, concerned, asked if he was okay and if he wasn't working too hard. The Duke replied that he might die of exhaustion with the amount of work he had. Indignant, Leonor asked who dared to leave her father so tired and declared that she would crush everyone. Surprised but amused by his daughter's attitude, the Duke asked why she wanted to know and if she was planning to take on the culprits herself. Leonor, full of conviction, replied that yes, that was exactly what she intended to do. The focus suddenly shifted to a question about Lord Ardia and why he was separated from his wife. It was explained that Ardia, who used to be the head of the family, had left his wife and children in the north to move to the capital alone at the start of their marriage. This decision was made so he could support his family. In his absence, the current Countess Basgruner had taken on the role of leader and the corresponding title. Finally, the story shows Leonor observing a scene where Lord Ardia begged his wife to stop attacking him while she called him a scoundrel and asked what he meant by no. Watching the argument unfold, Leonor, who already knew it would end this way, decided to step back discreetly. At the same time, she reflected that her etiquette teachers, especially Countess Basgruner, were excessively aggressive. While all of this was happening, Levup, Leonor's personal guard, appeared. She asked Leonor if everything was alright, and Leonor seized the opportunity to complain about the aggressiveness of her etiquette teachers. Confused, Levup replied that northern people were just full of energy but that etiquette in the north was still a highly respected virtue. At that moment, Levup explained that Countess Basgruner had been very famous in her youth, known for making men faint just by holding a teacup. Curious, Leonor listened to the explanation and thought that it was both surprising and peculiar. As she reflected, she heard a clattering noise and mused that Countess Basgruner still managed to knock out the teacups she used. Shortly after, Leonor encountered the Marquis in the castle corridors. He looked lost and explained that he had gotten confused with the floors, blaming his advanced age. Seizing the chance, Leonor decided to guide him to the 4th floor, where the Duke's office was located, because she wanted to take the opportunity to see him. During their walk, the Marquis commented on the Fardu family's long-standing loyalty to House Volio, something few people knew. When they arrived at the office, the conversation shifted to a more serious topic, the illegal trade of monsters. The Marquis revealed that 3 noble families were directly involved. He explained how these families smuggled monsters illegally, using hidden routes and Imperial Knights acting as mercenaries. Upon hearing this, the Duke grew furious, crushed a jewel in his hand, and ordered immediate measures to be taken. Meanwhile, Leonor began her weekly training. Connie, always attentive, wished her to be careful and not get hurt. Leonor, jokingly, replied that if she did get hurt, she would blame her father. During training, the Duke remarked that Leonor had managed to release her beastly fangs, an impressive feat for someone her age. He explained that she needed to learn how to control this power. Furthermore, he informed her that strength training would be introduced since she was his successor. Surprised, Leonor asked directly if he really intended for her to lead the family. The Duke confirmed, saying that this had been his plan ever since adopting her. Still in disbelief, Leonor stared at her father, trying to process the weight of the responsibility being placed on her shoulders. She commented that her father truly lived his life exactly how he wanted. The Duke then said that if she really didn't want to follow his proposal, he could reconsider the situation. He added that, considering Leonor's youth, there was still the possibility that he might remarry in the future. However, the Duke reassured her that regardless of that, she would always remain his daughter. He also explained that there was no rule stating that the eldest child of House Volio had to be the heir. After hearing this, Leonor reflected for a moment and concluded that she could give her father's idea a chance. Later, we see Leonor walking with Levup. Levup observed Leonor closely and asked if she was having fun. Leonor replied that she was and shared what her father had told her, that he would personally teach her how to use her beastly fangs. Leonor then asked Levup if she had seen the Duke recently. Levup replied that it had been a while, though she often saw him when delivering reports to the vice commander. Smirking, Leonor asked if that report was for Mano. Laughing at her own teasing, Leonor continued walking and soon spotted the Duke. She paused to observe him and, in a playful tone, asked Levup if he didn't look just like a cat. Levup laughed and replied that everyone already knew that. Curious, Leonor asked if Levup liked the Duke. Levup answered seriously that she had a great deal of respect for him. Unsatisfied, Leonor pushed further. Would you like to marry him? Levup quickly denied it and firmly stated that people should value their lives. Soon after, the Duke called for Leonor. He placed his hands on her shoulders, and she remarked that it had been a while since they last saw each other. She also asked if he had been very busy. The Duke confirmed, saying he had been overloaded lately. Teasing her, he asked if Leonor had gained weight. Rolling her eyes, Leonor replied that he should have asked if she had grown taller. The Duke, grinning mischievously, countered, "Isn't that the same thing?" Leonor complained that he always said cruel things, to which the Duke retorted, "Is that how you speak to your very busy father?" Changing the subject, Leonor asked if he had been sleeping well and suggested they take a nap together after her training. Laughing, the Duke responded that her disastrous sleep habits made him fear getting kicked in the face. Slightly annoyed, Leonor protested that Connie had said she looked like a baby animal while sleeping. The Duke, with a smirk, asked, "Did she really say you look like a baby animal?" Huffing, Leonor clarified that Connie hadn't meant it that way. She continued complaining that the Duke always made mean jokes. Still, Leonor couldn't resist teasing back, so, in the end, nothing else matters if a person is rich, beautiful, and muscular. The Duke, amused, agreed and asked what she was implying. With a sigh, Leonor called him irritating but said that since he was her father, she would try to be patient. The Duke sarcastically thanked her, and Leonor shot back, "If you're so grateful, you should include me in your will as the sole heir to the Volio family fortune. And don't forget to mention I'll inherit all the power and authority, too." The Duke asked if she really wanted that, reminding her that she would face countless people trying to bring her down in the future. Leonor changed the subject when she noticed the area was empty and asked why no one else was there. The Duke explained that they would use the entire space that day. Impressed, Leonor exclaimed that her heart had skipped a beat, saying it felt like he had rented the place just for her. The Duke laughed and clarified that the place was already family property. Interrupting, Leonor said that was fascinating. Soon after, the Duke threw a crooked circle on the ground. Leonor, curious, asked what it was. He explained that it had to do with beastly fangs. Skeptical, Leonor replied that it didn't look like that at all. The Duke reaffirmed that it was. With a philosophical air, Leonor remarked that the world always had a peculiar way of being fair. Laughing, the Duke said that in that case, he would draw her face on the ground. Leonor, with good humor, agreed, saying that after all, it was related to beastly fangs. It was then explained that beastly fangs were a power passed down exclusively through the Volio family lineage. Ancient records indicated that all those who possessed this power resided in the north. The Duke continued his explanation, saying that the beastly fangs involved both aura and mana. He clarified that aura could strengthen both the user's body and weapons, while mana allowed the use of magic by harnessing natural elements. The Duke elaborated that beastly fangs enabled the use of both aura and mana simultaneously. He mentioned that it was just a theory, but he believed Leonor had already experienced both powers. Reflecting on Leonor's protective nature towards the other children, he speculated that she likely faced conflicts with adults at the orphanage. The Duke concluded that Leonor might have unconsciously activated the fangs during those situations. He added that if she had endured all that physical abuse without the protection of her dormant fangs, the situation could have been far worse. Even inactive, the fangs had been safeguarding her body and ensuring her survival. Leonor listened attentively to his explanation and, after a moment of silence, smiled brightly. "So that means the Volio family protected me," she said, content. Leonor expressed happiness at this discovery because it showed that she was connected to her father in some way. The Duke, observing his daughter's reaction, remained silent for a few moments. He then asked, curious, why that made her so joyful. Leonor simply smiled, as if words weren't enough to express her feelings. The Duke then announced that he would show Leonor a practical demonstration of the beastly fangs power. He picked up a piece of wood and, using his abilities, crushed it effortlessly. He then made the wood levitate in the air, controlling it with precise movements. In a swift motion, he launched the piece of wood to the ground, where it embedded deeply into the surface with immense force. Leonor, eyes wide in amazement, watched the entire demonstration and couldn't hide her awe. "That's incredible," she exclaimed. "The wood really got stuck in the ground. That was a perfect and clean shot." She remarked that it was super cool, to which the Duke, smiling with satisfaction, replied that it was because he had done it. Leonor looked at her father with renewed admiration. "You're amazing, Daddy," she said enthusiastically. She then asked if he thought she would be able to do that someday, considering he was already used to it while she was still inexperienced. The Duke extended his hand toward her with an encouraging expression and replied, "There's always a first time for everything. And I'm the one who will teach you, so don't get discouraged." Feeling motivated by her father's words, Leonor lit up. She asked what she needed to do and how to start. Sometime later, however, we see her completely exhausted. "Daddy, your daughter is literally on the brink of death here," Leonor said dramatically. The Duke, however, remained firm. "You're not going to give up just because of this," he stated. Leonor, panting and stammering, asked if he was being harsh with her just because she wasn't his biological daughter. The Duke ignored the provocation and explained that her training consisted of running 3 laps around the arena. He then asked rhetorically, "Who else would be a better father for you than me? You'll need strong physical endurance if you want to control the beastly fangs." He then asked Leonor if she knew how serious the side effects of using the fangs could be. Intrigued, Leonor asked if there really were side effects and, if so, whether they were extremely serious. The Duke explained, seriously, that it wasn't something he would tell just anyone, but there were individuals who had fallen gravely ill after using the beastly fangs. Leonor then remembered feeling very unwell the last time she had tried to use the power and asked if that had been caused by the side effects. The Duke confirmed this and listed the possible symptoms: intense headaches, chills throughout the body, allergies, skin rashes, and muscle pains across the entire body, among others. He emphasized that while the beastly fangs powers were incredibly useful, they came with significant risks, especially for those who were not physically or mentally prepared to use them. After hearing all of this, Leonor suspiciously asked if it was some sort of drug or something similar. The scene then shifts to Flam, who appeared very happy. She remarked that she had been feeling extremely joyful lately and revealed that the reason for this was a letter she had received. It was explained that the letter came from the young lady of the Volio family. Flam thought to herself that she always felt envious when her siblings and cousins received letters, but now, having received one herself, she was overjoyed. Additionally, it was mentioned that inside the letter were strawberry milk candies. These candies were known to be monopolized by the Volio family. Flam recalled hearing from her brother that the candies were made by a very renowned confectioner and were so expensive that they cost the same as an extremely luxurious cake. She thought that, since her brother might end up stealing the rest of the candies, it would be safer to store them in her treasure chest. Shortly after, someone called for Flam. She cheerfully replied that the person could enter. It was the Viscount standing at the door. He explained that he had come because he was curious about what his daughter was doing. Radiant, Flam told him that she had received a letter. The Viscount asked if the letter was from Miss Volio, and Flam confirmed, saying that she was about to read its contents. The Viscount, hearing this, said he understood and felt relieved knowing his daughter was managing to interact well with others. He then asked Flam if she minded sharing the contents of the letter. Excited, Flam replied that it wasn't a problem at all. She began reading the letter aloud. Leonor had written in the letter, "I once saw someone get splashed with ice-cold water, and it's far more entertaining to watch than you'd imagine. Mr. Ardia, in a way, was begging at my feet while the Countess thrashed furiously, her white hair flying in every direction. It was quite the scene." The Viscount was left speechless, clearly surprised by the tone of the letter, but he continued listening as Flam read the rest. The letter concluded with Leonor saying, "I learned how to defeat an enemy using just a teacup, thanks to Countess Boskroner." Once again, the Viscount was left speechless, unsure how to respond to such a description. The scene shifted to Lupe, who was delivering several documents to the Duke. He explained that the papers contained the list of products scheduled for delivery by the Tabanis company, but the schedule had been altered. The Duke, analyzing the documents, instructed that the delivery dates should be adjusted to follow the current timeline. Lupe acknowledged the instruction and confirmed he would make the changes as requested. The Duke then asked if Lupe wasn't curious about why he had requested this. Lupe replied that, while he didn't completely understand the reason, he trusted the Duke had his reasons. The Duke, with a faint tone of irony, commented that the Viscount seemed generous with his praise. He also mentioned that Leonor was learning a lot from young Lady Sarada. The Viscount, on the other hand, added that his own daughter was also improving thanks to Leonor's influence. Previously, she had been extremely shy, but now she had become livelier and more curious after spending time with Miss Volio. He recalled, almost as a passing thought, that his daughter had received a letter from young Miss Volio. Upon hearing this, the Duke was visibly intrigued. He remarked that he didn't know what to say about the letter but admitted it was surprisingly well written and mature. The Duke asked the Viscount what was written in the letter, and the Viscount shared its contents. Later, the Duke called for Leonor. When she arrived, she asked what he wanted to talk about. The Duke, with a tone mixing seriousness and exasperation, said that it had been a long time since he had given up on her childhood innocence, but even so, she shouldn't destroy the innocence of other children. Leonor, confused, asked when exactly she had done that. The Duke explained that Viscount Sarada had read the letter she sent to Flam. Leonor, with a tone of surprise and provocation, replied, "Wow, I never imagined that gentlemen would judge people like that." She then asked why parents didn't respect the privacy of their children. The Duke sighed, lightly tapped her forehead, and asked what was wrong with her. He said she should place her hand on her heart and reflect on her actions. Leonor, however, seemed completely indifferent, her expression showing that she didn't care much. Casually, she commented, "Alright, maybe I don't have any filters, but I'm still pretty innocent." Not convinced, the Duke asked why she had learned how to hurt someone with a teacup. Leona responded that she had simply written about what she had learned and defensively asked if it wasn't good for her to know at least one way to defend herself. The Duke, firmly, said that the only thing she needed to learn was etiquette. He questioned why she found it necessary to learn anything beyond that, considering that if she were ever disrespected, she could simply use the beastly fangs to handle any problem. Hearing this, Leona laughed and promised to be careful. The Duke then clarified that Viscount Sarada hadn't invaded his daughter's privacy, but that the two had read the letter together, and Flum had been very happy to receive the correspondence. Later, the Duke called Leona again. With a perplexed expression, he asked why the main character of a fairy tale needed to have his faucet cut off. Leona explained that Flum had mentioned a story called The Angel and the Hunter. She summarized the plot. The story was about a hunter who stole the dress of an angel while she bathed and forced her to become his wife. In the end, the angel managed to escape, taking her children back to heaven. Leona added that Flum felt pity for the hunter, even though he was a horrible person. The Duke, even more confused, asked who had suggested she write about the hunter losing his faucet. He also wanted to know where she had learned to talk like that. Leona simply replied that she had learned it at the orphanage. Upon hearing this explanation, the Duke grew thoughtful but quickly made a decision. It was announced that the orphanage staff would receive a visit that very day. The Duke mentioned that, in a few days, he would have a guest. Leona, curious, asked if it would be the Marquis, calling him Grandpa. The Duke, with a tone of irony, asked why the Marquis would be a guest and suggested that instead, she should just offend him directly. Surprised, Leona responded that she couldn't believe her father was teaching his own daughter to insult people. She then asked who the guest would be. The Duke explained that it was a friend of his. Leona, incredulous, replied that it didn't make sense since he didn't have friends. Suddenly, she remembered something and wondered, in thought, if the guest would be Count Liner. The scene shifted to Count Liner, who was in his drawing room and called for someone to enter. A young lady entered the room, and he commented that she had arrived earlier than expected. He then asked if she had a good trip. The young lady, in a direct tone, asked why he hadn't told her about what was happening. The Count, confused, asked what exactly she was referring to. The young lady replied that he shouldn't pretend ignorance and mentioned the fact that the Duke had adopted a child from an orphanage. The Count asked if she was referring to Duke Achin, but the young lady denied it and clarified that she was talking about Duke Volio. She explained that she had heard the information from a lady who had returned from a meeting in the north. According to that lady, although Leona had been adopted from an orphanage, there were rumors that she was, in fact, the illegitimate daughter of Duke Volio. The young lady added that she had also heard that the Duke had registered Leona's name in the Volio family tree. With a serious tone, she remarked that the Count should have informed her about something so important. Count Liner was left utterly confused by the revelation. The young lady, realizing his reaction, concluded that he truly didn't know anything. In his thoughts, the Count questioned why Duke Volio hadn't told him about something so significant. Leona appeared next, visibly annoyed. Around her, several maids buzzed with pride and excitement over her appearance. They kept exclaiming how perfect she looked, but Leona's expression clearly showed her displeasure. One of the maids gently asked her to spin around so they could admire the full effect. Reluctantly, Leona complied. The maids, impressed, exclaimed that she looked like the eighth wonder of the world. Leona carefully descended the stairs, holding her dress to avoid tripping. At the bottom of the staircase, the Duke was waiting for her. He observed her closely and commented that she looked like a completely different person. Leona, lacking patience, retorted that her three maids had gone overboard. She then asked her father if he thought she looked strange. The Duke replied that her appearance was fine, though it was clear Leona was uncomfortable, and he agreed with her disapproval. With a faint smile, the Duke suggested that she should dress this way occasionally. Leona sighed and mentioned that the maids had warned her not to attend the event and risk losing everything. Clearly unenthusiastic, Leona stared at her father, who simply gave her a look that said there was no alternative. The Duke asked if they were talking about Miss Liner. It was explained that the Liner County family was one of those that revitalized the Western Empire, a region known for its lush forests, vibrant fields, and beautiful lakes. This family had built a port in their hometown, which flourished after gradually introducing trade routes for merchant ships with the south. This development turned the area into a major exchange point between the north and south, bringing great prosperity. With such innovative ancestors, the Liner family had become one of the wealthiest in the empire. Soon after, Count Liner appeared, deep in thought, muttering the Duke's name with a melancholic tone. At that moment, his daughter let out an excited scream, marveling at the snow falling all around. The eldest daughter of the Count, Opicula Liner, was introduced along with her younger sister, Fina Liner. The Countess commented that while there was abundant snow in the north, it had already melted completely in the capital. Opicula asked her father when they would arrive at the Duke's residence. The Countess replied patiently that they were close, and only a short distance remained. Opicula commented that it was her first time visiting the north, and her younger sister, Fina, agreed, saying it was her first time as well. Both asked the Count if he had been there before. However, the Count did not answer, leaving Opicula slightly disappointed. The Countess tried to ease the moment by explaining that their father was preoccupied with important matters. She reflected that the Count was likely still upset, as the previous night he had drunk heavily and even cried after discovering that the Duke had adopted the daughter from an orphanage without telling him. The Countess called for the Count, who distractedly responded. She asked what he was thinking so deeply about. The Count revealed that he felt a little betrayed by the Duke. The Countess, understanding, commented that considering how close they were, it was natural for him to feel that way. The Count admitted that it made him feel insignificant, as the Duke had hidden something so important. The Countess reassured him, saying that because of their strong friendship, the Duke would likely tell him everything eventually. She assured him that their bond was too strong to be broken by a simple misunderstanding. The Count, still lost in thought, wondered to himself if the Duke viewed him the same way. He reflected, "We're friends, my greatest friend whom I always take pride in." Trying to calm his thoughts, he concluded that the Duke must have faced difficult situations and was probably frustrated as well. The next moment showed the Count crying like a child. The scene was so literal that, shortly after, another child crying was shown, emphasizing how much the Count's behavior resembled that of a child. Amid his tears, he asked the Duke how he could do this to him. Leonor, watching the scene, commented, "Father, you never mentioned that he wasn't quite right in the head. I mean, this is a bit strange." The Duke looked concerned about the situation. Shortly after, Opicula approached the Duke, formally introducing herself. She thanked him for inviting them to visit his home and mentioned that they would be staying for a few days. The Duke, polite, replied that she must be tired from the journey and addressed her as young lady. Leonor, hearing this, remarked sarcastically, "Look at you, you really are good with words." Opicula turned toward Leonor, and the two exchanged intense looks. Curiously, Opicula asked directly, "Are you really the Duke's daughter?" Leonor firmly responded, "Yes, I am." "So what?" Opicula then declared that when she grew up, she planned to marry the Duke. At that moment, Leonor remembered a previous conversation with the Duke, in which he mentioned that the daughter of that family liked him a lot. Back then, he had told Leonor not to lose to that girl. Now, Leonor finally understood what he meant and was left thoughtful. Opicula continued, saying that she would become Leonor's mother in the future. She claimed that, for this reason, Leonor should treat her kindly. Opicula added, "If you're a good daughter, I'll be a good mother." Hearing this, Leonor questioned what kind of absurd situation she was experiencing. Visibly irritated, she almost swore but was quickly interrupted by the Duke, who stepped in. The Duke stated that the guests must be exhausted after the long trip and instructed the maids to guide them to their rooms. Shortly after, the scene shifted to a nighttime view of the Duke's mansion. Leonor, still intrigued by the events, commented that she had heard rumors about Opicula being scolded. A maid confirmed it, saying it had caused a great commotion. The scene shifted to the Countess reprimanding both her daughter and the Count. She told her husband that he should be ashamed of himself and stop crying like a child. Leonor, observing everything, thought to herself that this reception hardly seemed like a warm welcome but something entirely crazy. In her mind, Leonor reflected on the Count. She referred to him as a savior because she believed it was thanks to him that the Duke decided to adopt her. Leonor pondered that, if the Count had not bragged so much about his own children, she likely would have continued her life of abuse. She acknowledged that, despite everything, the Count was a kind man in the story, someone who loved and cared for his family. Additionally, he was a strong supporter of the protagonist. However, observing the Count's current behavior, Leonor was surprised. She thought, who would have thought that the man described this way in the story would turn into someone so reckless upon seeing his friend's face again? Deep in thought, Leonor came to a conclusion. Maybe the Count has feelings for my father. When she voiced this thought out loud, Connie, her maid, scolded her, telling her to stop thinking of something so absurd. Leonor, however, insisted, but that's exactly what the situation looks like. Connie, now more stern, strongly denied it. Leonor teased further, "Well, there are so many men hanging around him since he's so handsome." This made Connie shout again, insisting it wasn't true at all. Meanwhile, the Duke was having a conversation with the Count and remarked that he should feel grateful for marrying such an incredible woman. The Countess, silent, nodded in agreement. The Duke, looking at the Count, murmured, "And to think this person is my friend." He then asked the Countess about her daughter, mentioning that Opicula seemed a bit sad earlier. The Countess sighed and explained that it was the result of her own poor guidance. She revealed that Opicula had recently become obsessed with a fairy tale where a stepmother mistreated the heroine. As a result, Opicula concluded that all stepmothers were cruel to their stepdaughters and declared she wouldn't behave the same way. The Duke, smiling, commented that for a 6-year-old child, Opicula was quite intelligent for making such connections between stories and reality. However, he thought to himself that, despite being clever, she still wasn't as sharp as Leonor. The Countess, observing his reaction, noticed that the Duke was smiling, a rare and genuine expression. The scene then shifted to the moment when the Count introduced his daughter to the Duke. The girl reflected that, the first time she saw the Duke, instead of noticing how handsome he was, she felt an overwhelming pressure from him. It was such an intense presence that it frightened her. However, she realized that, for the first time, she had overcome that fear, and she was sure it was because of the Duke's adorable daughter, Leonor. Shortly after, the Count called for the Countess. Upon seeing him, she asked if he had been crying again. He replied, somewhat hesitantly, that he was just a little disappointed. The Duke, curious, asked why he would feel that way. The Count, in turn, posed a question: when did things get to this point? The Duke fell into thought, pondering whether he should tell the Count about Leonor's origins. He reflected that, while the Count was overly emotional, he was still a trustworthy person who could keep a secret. Nevertheless, he considered that if he were to share the truth, he should first consult Leonor for her opinion. Still upset, the Count commented, "I never imagined you'd be so irresponsible. Having a daughter in secret. This is unbelievable." The Duke, with a resigned tone, agreed, "Yes, I never thought this would happen either." It was mentioned that, at that moment, the Duke appeared reduced to a shadow of himself, burdened by guilt and regret. The Duke stared silently ahead, lost in thought. He reflected that he always felt this weight on his heart every time he looked at Leonor. He thought to himself, if I had tried a little harder, I could have found her sooner. If I had shown more interest, I could have saved my niece from a living hell. Leonor wouldn't have had to endure such difficult times. The Count, observing the Duke, told him he should have searched for Leonor much earlier. The Duke agreed, admitting, "Yes, you're right. I really should have." The scene shifted to the Count reminiscing about the moment his own daughter, Opicula, was born. He recalled the day vividly. It showed him asking the Countess if he could hold the baby in his arms. The Countess, seeing him so emotional, asked why he was crying again. It was described that the Count was a clumsy and often awkward father, but that day, he experienced an indescribable joy. He reflected that the stronger a person is, the lonelier they become. This newfound happiness made him cry with emotion. He commented that seeing the Duke with Leonor filled him with mixed feelings, sadness that the Duke hadn't shared the truth sooner, but also joy at the scene before him. It was clear that the Duke was beginning to experience the same happiness the Count felt when he became a father. The Count looked at the Duke and thought, "You have the same expression I had. The expression of a father." Returning to the Duke, the Count commented that it was good to see how well they were getting along. He admitted he had been worried when he first heard the news, but after seeing them together, he felt relieved. With a sincere smile, he congratulated the Duke, saying he was genuinely happy for him. The Countess, who had been observing as well, added that Leonor truly resembled the Duke. She remarked that the way they communicated was adorable and charming, especially the calm and comfort Leonor displayed in her father's arms. She concluded by saying that, regardless of what others might say, it was clear to everyone that they had a wonderful relationship. After hearing this, the Duke gave a faint smile. The Count then asked about the real reason he had been summoned there. The Duke explained that 3 pests were beginning to spread their insects throughout the West. He commented that he wasn't surprised by the situation, as he had already suspected something was wrong, given the frequent issues involving the territory and his company. The Duke asked if the problem was related to the warehouse located between the north and the west. The Count confirmed, explaining that Baron Hercules, one of Marquis Raspi's vassals, was creating a huge mess with the security, especially after having rented out the entire location. The Count reported that the Baron had apparently hired mercenaries to guard the facility instead of using regular staff. He was also trying to control the regions surrounding the warehouse, which only worsened the situation. The Duke, irritated, remarked, "Count, you say this is a problem, yet you still haven't taken any action against it." The Count replied that the only one with the authority to manage that warehouse was its owner, Marquis Raspy, and that under normal circumstances, he should have already been investigating the situation. The Countess intervened, asking whether Baron Hercules might be falsifying reports. Nevertheless, she questioned what his motivation would be for doing so. The Count argued that the Baron lacked the capability for something so elaborate. The Countess then asked if he might be receiving assistance from someone more skilled, but the Count clarified that his doubt lay in a different direction. The Duke, on the other hand, stated firmly that someone must be manipulating the Baron. The Countess agreed and revealed that she had heard rumors that the Baron recently traveled south to the territory of the Lore family, which was connected to the imperial consort. Upon hearing this, the Duke visibly bristled with irritation. The Count concluded that this meant Marquis Raspy was aware of the entire situation but chose to ignore the problem. The Countess questioned whether the Marquis had made this decision because of his daughter, the Empress. The Count agreed that, if this were the case, it made sense. The Duke interrupted the conversation, speaking in a grave tone. Unfortunately, the tiger is being cornered. It was explained that as long as the Emperor kept the Empress by his side, the Marquis would have little room to act. Shortly after, Leonor was shown greeting the Countess with a polite good morning. She asked courteously how they had spent the night and whether they had slept well. The Countess responded by praising Leonor's impeccable posture, which Leonor attributed to her etiquette teacher, Countess Boscrone. The Countess remarked that Boscrone was highly respected in social circles and that there were even rumors of young nobles fainting when they saw her holding a teacup with such elegance. Additionally, she mentioned that Boscrone had an excellent reputation in the capital. Leonor, in a refined manner, praised Countess Lina, saying she believed the Countess could also leave as strong an impression as Boscrone. Leonor mentioned that her first impression of Countess Lina was memorable because, when they first met, the Countess had been scolding both her daughter and husband. Despite this, Leonor stated that, overall, the Countess was a kind person. She compared the Countess to Connie, which made her feel comfortable and not afraid of her. Shortly after, the Countess's daughters approached. The youngest, full of energy, jumped into her mother's lap. Opicula also greeted her mother, but with a more subdued demeanor. Observing the scene, Leonor thought to herself that they had undoubtedly received some scoldings recently. She walked over to Opicula and, in a friendly tone, commented that she, too, had made mistakes and needed to acknowledge them. Leonor reflected that, although her first impression of Opicula had not been the best, she should try to improve their relationship. After all, despite Opicula being just a girl, her mental age seemed far more mature. Realistically speaking, Opicula was older than Leonor herself. Leonor nearly lost her patience and raised her voice but stopped herself when she realized that Opicula was handling the situation in her own peculiar way. Nevertheless, Leonor couldn't help but think, this girl is incredibly difficult to deal with.